Struggling to sleep tonight? Then let's return to the place where it all began. Over the next few hours, we'll spend a quiet night inside Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, exploring the complete story of the very first Five Nights at Freddy's. From the haunted animatronics and the missing children to the mysterious phone guy, the newspaper clippings, and every secret hidden between the security cameras. We'll piece together the full story of Five Nights at Freddy's 1. No jump scares, no shouting, just a slow, calm journey through one of horror gaming's most iconic mysteries. Part 1. Why Fazbear Entertainment needed another Freddy's. Following the financial catastrophe and public relations fallout of the 1987 toy location, which culminated in the infamous Bite of 87, Fazbear Entertainment found itself on the brink of total bankruptcy. To prevent corporate liquidation, the company abandoned its dreams of advanced artificial intelligence. They recognized that the only way to retain their brand equity was to retreat into a downsized business model. Shifting focus away from high-tech innovation toward low-cost survival, the corporate board realized that the multi-million-dollar investment in plastic shell animatronics and facial recognition software was a total failure. Insurers refused to cover high-tech venues, while health departments continued to file citations regarding ongoing safety hazards. The executives needed a strategy that would allow the franchise to exist without incurring massive liability. They decided that returning to a simpler, low-cost operational style was the only path forward. By removing the high-tech features that had defined the 1987 building, the company eliminated expensive software maintenance contracts and specialized engineering staff. They simplified the daily routine, scaling back performance shows and reducing menu options to lower overhead. The goal was no longer market dominance, but basic survival in a market that viewed the brand with deep suspicion. This shift marked the end of Fazbear Entertainment's push toward modern technological supremacy. The company accepted that it couldn't engineer its way out of the dark reputation that followed its mascot characters. Instead, it relied on cheap operations, nostalgic marketing, and legal disclaimers to keep its doors open. The decision set the stage for one last desperate restaurant opening in the early 1990s. Part 2. Choosing the new location. To minimize monthly operational overhead, the corporate real estate team secured a smaller, older commercial building. Timeline details suggest this was the repurposed shell of the original 1985 flagship pizzeria. By returning to this older facility, the company avoided costly lease agreements and zoning taxes. The venue was architecturally compressed, sacrificing expansive gaming zones to force the entire restaurant infrastructure into a tight floor plan designed to run on a skeleton crew. The smaller floor plan allowed the company to cut heating, lighting, and maintenance expenses across every shift. Instead of managing multiple dining rooms and secondary stages, the property featured a single main dining hall facing a wooden stage. The layout forced foot traffic into revenue zones while keeping utility costs as low as possible. It was an exercise in extreme commercial minimalism. Reoccupying an older facility also allowed the company to reuse existing infrastructure, such as ventilation ducts, kitchen mounts, and electrical conduits. While this saved money up front, it meant inheriting structural decay, rotted drywall, and outdated wiring grids. The building was prone to power fluctuations, roof leaks, and plumbing failures that required constant patchwork repairs from floor staff. The selection of this compressed building reflected Fazbear Entertainment's desperation. The company prioritized immediate financial savings over long-term structural integrity. placing its assets inside a facility that was already falling apart. This compressed, poorly lit building provided the claustrophobic backdrop for the final chapter of the classic pizzeria era. Part 3. Bringing back the originals. Lacking the capital to manufacture a new line of performers, company engineers executed a crude triage protocol on the original 1985 cast. They pulled the mutilated remains of the withered models out of corporate storage, stripped away their ruined fabric coatings, and replaced them with simpler plush shells. This cosmetic facelift created the classic look seen during the final era of operations. Underneath these new fleece coverings, however, the underlying mechanical reality remained completely unchanged. Their core steel endoskeletons were the exact same units built by Henry Emily years earlier. The mechanics oiled rusted joints and tightened loose servos, but they didn't replace the internal mainframes or core processors. The internal components still held the digital records and physical residue of their past iterations. The company ignored the dark stains and strange odors on the metal frames, treating the haunted animatronics as cheap corporate hardware. They scrubbed the surface grease away, but failed to address the deep spiritual contamination that anchored the souls of the missing children to the machinery. The spirits of Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, and Fritz remained firmly attached to the mechanical bones of Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy. This cheap refurbishment provided the dead children with fully functional bodies once again, restoring the physical mobility they'd lost when their old suits were stripped for parts. The superficial repairs gave the mascots a friendly outward appearance, but the underlying threat was more concentrated than it had ever been. Fazbear Entertainment placed the restored band back on stage, completely unaware that they prepared 4 haunted coffins for another public venue. Part 4. The building itself. The final layout of the pizzeria was a monument to corporate corner cutting. The main dining area was dominated by the central show stage, flanked by the cordoned-off Pirate Cove stage. Hidden behind the main stage lay the industrial backstage room, while the rest of the perimeter was split into a grease-choked kitchen, a narrow supply closet, and a hidden safe room. This infrastructure converged onto a tiny, indefensible security office equipped with 2 heavy motorized safety doors. These doors ran on an unstable, limited backup generator grid that punished the night watchmen for keeping them closed. The narrow corridors provided direct pathways from the stage to the office desk, creating a dangerous funnel that directed any roaming animatronics straight toward the guard. The backstage workshop was packed with bare endoskeletons and spare mascot heads sitting on wooden shelves, their empty optical sockets staring blankly across the room. The kitchen sat unmonitored by the surveillance network, its camera feed intentionally disabled by management to hide grease buildup on the floor. Every room reflected an operational philosophy that put low costs ahead of safety. The physical design of the building created a psychological trap for anyone working the overnight shift. The dark hallways amplified every mechanical footstep, while the flickering lights created deceptive shadows along the corridor walls. The building was an isolated arena where a lone employee was forced to manage 4 aggressive machines with a failing energy grid. Part 5. Fazbear Entertainment starts again. When the front doors unlocked for the final time in the early 1990s, the company launched a calculated marketing campaign built entirely around nostalgia and simplicity. They publicly dismissed decades of missing children reports, urban myths, and daytime bitings as unverified internet fabrications. Corporate executives pinned the survival of the brand on cheap pizza, basic stage loops, and the illusion of family-friendly fun. The marketing team targeted local parents who remembered the original brand from their childhood, framing the new restaurant as a wholesome return to traditional entertainment. They advertised affordable birthday packages and classic arcade gaming, attempting to scrub the company's name of its dark reputation. The board calculated that public memory was short enough to allow a commercial comeback. Behind the scenes, management maintained a strict policy of secrecy regarding past scandals. Employees were required to sign non-disclosure agreements before receiving their first paycheck, forbidding them from discussing historical incidents with customers or reporters. The company built a wall of legal paperwork to protect its brand, prioritizing corporate reputation over transparency. Fazbear Entertainment reopened its doors with absolute arrogance, convinced that corporate spin and discounted party packages could overcome a multi-decade history of trauma. They welcomed a fresh generation of families into their dining room, completely blind to the fact that the haunted animatronics on stage were ready to begin another cycle of violence. Part 6. A typical day at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. During standard operating hours, the restaurant functioned as a hollow caricature of its former glory. The daytime shift was a loud routine of serving low-grade sheet pizza, trading cheap plastic toys at the counter, and playing pre-recorded musical tracks from the main stage loop. Floor servers cleared paper plates from laminate tables while toddlers gathered near the stage to watch the characters perform. To the local families who visited, the environment felt like a normal, slightly outdated suburban arcade. They remained completely oblivious to the biological fluids slowly leaking from the characters' seams or the corporate rot festering beneath the floorboards. Children cheered as Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica executed their pre-programmed movements, accepting the cheerful mascot illusion without question. Behind the counter, employees worked under constant pressure to meet daily sales targets and clear party tables quickly. Floor managers monitored token redemption ratios and kitchen prep times, deflecting customer complaints about strange smells or jerky character movements with pre-approved corporate scripts. The daily shift was engineered to maximize customer turnover while hiding operational flaws. When the dinner rush ended and the final guests left the building, the cheerful music stopped and the dining room fell silent. Workers swept up paper tickets, wiped down greasy tables, and locked the front doors, leaving the building dark. The daytime facade faded away, passing operational control over to a lone night watchman tasked with surviving until dawn. Part 7. Employees, technicians, and management. The daily human engine of the facility was run by a tiny, low-wage staff operating under an oppressive corporate culture of forced normalization. Technicians were instructed to dismiss mechanical stalls or erratic character eye contact as simple servo motor lag, applying temporary fixes to keep the robots running through the afternoon show. Floor managers aggressively handled customer sanitation complaints with cheerful scripts, reassuring parents that any unusual smell was simply due to industrial cleaning chemicals used on the plush skins. Staff were conditioned to ignore warning signs, prioritizing job security and corporate policy over safety concerns. The workforce operated in a state of continuous denial to collect their weekly paychecks. Corporate management monitored the facility through strict performance reports, cutting labor hours to the absolute minimum required to keep the doors open. They ignored maintenance requests for the failing electrical grid and refused to replace worn mechanical components inside the animatronics. The management team viewed the restaurant as a low-cost asset that needed to extract every possible dollar before closing permanently. This culture of neglect and denial created an environment where serious hazards were routinely ignored. Employees turned a blind eye to strange suit behavior, dirty carpet stains, and missing equipment, allowing the underlying curse to fester unchecked. The human workforce unknowingly helped maintain the corporate illusion right up until the night shift began. Part 8. Freddy Fazbear. Freddy Fazbear functions as the center stage frontman of the band and the ultimate tactical executioner of the night shift. During performance hours, his programming locks him into a warm, predictable lead vocalist routine that commands the attention of the main dining room. He stands under bright spotlights, waving his microphone and leading the band through synchronized musical tracks. After dark, his behavior changes drastically. He operates with an intelligent stealth, hiding exclusively in the absolute darkness of the building's corners, such as the restrooms and east hallway. His presence in a dark sector is revealed only by his deep, echoing digital laugh that carries through the camera speakers. Unlike the other animatronics who approach openly, Freddy uses shadow coverage to slip past camera monitoring. Possessed by the spirit of Gabriel, Freddy acts as the strategic commander of the group, purposefully biding his time and waiting for the security office generator to fail before striking. He stays on stage during the early hours of the week, allowing Bonnie and Chica to drain the watchman's power grid before he begins his own methodical approach down the right corridor. When the office power hits zero and the building plunges into pitch black darkness, Freddy executes his signature attack routine. His glowing eyes illuminate the left doorway as he plays a melody from his internal music box, creating a moment of psychological dread before he breaches the office. He represents the calculating, patient leader of the haunted band. Part 9. Bonnie the Bunny. Bonnie the Bunny serves as the band's high-energy lead guitarist during the day, but transitions into the most aggressive stalker on the night shift. Possessed by the soul of Jeremy, Bonnie is hard-coded to leave the main stage first, utilizing the building's west hallway and supply closet to mount rapid, continuous assaults on the left security door. His spiritual manifestation is characterized by extreme restlessness and pure rage. He moves through the western corridor with a relentless pace, frequently teleporting between camera sectors and triggering severe digital twitching in the surveillance feeds. Bonnie doesn't wait in the shadows, choosing instead to attack the office door repeatedly to force the guard to spend precious generator power. When Bonnie reaches the left blind spot, his silhouette looms outside the office window, his optical sensors glowing in the light. If the watchman fails to close the motorized door in time, Bonnie slips into the room, disabling the door and light controls while emitting a subtle, raspy groan. Once inside, he waits for the guard to lower the monitor before executing his terminal attack. Bonnie's aggressive movement pattern makes him a constant physical threat throughout every night shift. He acts as a battering ram designed to drain the office power grid early in the night, forcing the guard into panic management. His relentless approach establishes the high-stakes pace of the night shift from the moment 12 a.m. arrives. Part 10. Chica the Chicken. Chica the Chicken functions as the backup singer and culinary mascot of the restaurant, but operates as a methodical flanker after midnight. Bound to the east hallway and kitchen avenues, Chica's movements are audibly documented by the violent clanging of pots and pans when she enters the unmonitored blind spots of the security system. Possessed by Susie, the first victim of the 1985 incident, Chica's behavior is deeply erratic and unsettling. She moves through the eastern side of the building with a slow, deliberate pace, stopping in the restrooms and east hallway before approaching the right side of the security office. When Chica reaches the right blind spot, she stands directly outside the window for prolonged intervals, her jaw unhinged and her optical sensors wide. She stares into the office with a hollow, mechanical fixity, creating intense pressure on the watchman to keep the right door closed. Like Bonnie, if she enters the room unobserved, she disables the door controls and waits for the monitor to drop. Chica's presence in the kitchen adds a distinct auditory dimension to the night shift. Because the video feed in camera 6 is permanently disabled, the guard must rely on sound cues to track her location. Her clanging of kitchen equipment provides visual relief on the monitor, but warns the guard that she is actively positioning herself for another assault on the right door. Part 11. Foxy the Pirate. Foxy the Pirate is a severely damaged asset isolated behind the purple star patterned curtains of Pirate Cove. His unique programming matrix allows him to completely bypass the standard room-to-room pathfinding loops of the other characters. If left unmonitored for too long, his internal system triggers a high-speed sprint down the west hallway directly toward the security office. Possessed by Fritz, Foxy represents a direct mechanical structural failure. His fabric skin is torn open across his chest and legs, exposing sharp thoracic pistons and rusted endoskeleton wiring. His unique behavior forces the guard to maintain a regular visual check on camera 1C to prevent his multi-stage exit routine from initializing. When Foxy breaks out of Pirate Cove, he dashes down the west hallway in a continuous motion captured on camera 2A. The guard has only seconds to react, flipping off the monitor and slamming the left security door shut before the fox hits the frame. Foxy bangs violently on the metal door, his heavy impact instantly draining massive chunks of the office's remaining electrical power. Each time Foxy attacks the left door, the power penalty increases, making repeated mistakes fatal to the guard's survival strategy. He punishes the watchman for ignoring surveillance duties, acting as a high-speed hazard that prevents the guard from sitting idle. Foxy's mechanics demand constant vigilance, making Pirate Cove one of the most stressful sectors to manage. Part 12. Golden Freddy. Golden Freddy exists within the code of Five Nights at Freddy's as an ethereal, reality-warping apparition rather than a physical, operating animatronic. Traced back to the empty yellow spring-lock suit from the original diner era, this entity can bypass the physical boundaries of the motorized office doors entirely. When triggered by the player viewing the West Hall corner camera poster, which occasionally shifts to display a close-up image of a yellow bear face, a chilling child's laugh echoes through the building. Upon lowering the monitor console, the empty, slumped shell of Golden Freddy materializes directly inside the office floor tiles, sitting motionless like a discarded costume. Possessed by the vengeful spirit of Cassidy, his manifestation triggers severe, blinding hallucinations that flash across the guard's vision alongside the phrase "It's me." Golden Freddy operates on a separate metaphysical tier from the main band, ignoring physical doors and power limits to confront the watchman directly. If the guard fails to raise the monitor console immediately upon seeing him, Golden Freddy executes a unique, crashing attack. A giant faceless yellow bear head fills the screen accompanied by a distorted mechanical scream, instantly crashing the game software. He stands as a terrifying reminder that some forces inside the pizzeria cannot be stopped by metal doors. Part 13. Endoskeletons, Spare Parts, and Backstage. The backstage room exposes the cold industrial anatomy beneath the restaurant's friendly facade. Its wooden shelves are lined with naked, unclad steel endoskeletons, exposed servo motors, and hollow plastic mascot faces that stare blankly into the dark. This room serves as a vital lore anchor, revealing the mechanical truth behind the mascot shells. This space exposes a deep, systemic behavioral bug within the animatronics programming. The characters are coded to recognize any uncostumed endoskeleton as a violation of restaurant safety rules. When they encounter a human night watchman after hours, their corrupted software registers the person as a bare metal endoskeleton out of suit, driving them to forcefully stuff the individual inside a spare Freddy Fazbear costume. This stuffing process means instant death for the victim, as the interior of the mascot suit is lined with sharp crossbeams, compressed steel springs, and exposed wiring. The heavy force used by the animatronics crushes the human body inside the narrow frame, forcing biological tissue through the fabric seams. A basic safety protocol is transformed into a lethal execution routine. The backstage room strips away all theatrical magic, showing the bare iron bones and hollow shells that make up the mascot band. It stands as a physical representation of the company's reckless engineering, where safety code overrides were left unpatched, turning maintenance workshop supplies into a gruesome murder weapon. Part 14. Phone Guy. Phone Guy is a loyal, veteran corporate employee who has survived every single era of the franchise's scandals. Operating as the company's chief operational bridge and night shift trainer, his voice cassettes serve as a living archive of normalized horror. He represents the ultimate company man, delivering terrifying information with a calm, casual demeanor. He is fully aware of the missing children, the spring lock failures, and the lethal habits of the animatronics. Yet he speaks of these horrors with bureaucratic detachment. He frames systemic corporate negligence as a collection of minor technicalities, advising new guards to accept dangerous working conditions as standard parts of the job. Throughout his recorded messages, Phone Guy displays a strange loyalty to the mascot band, despite knowing their lethal behavior. He admits that Foxy was always his personal favorite, expressing sympathy for the broken pirate sitting behind the curtains in Pirate Cove. He encourages incoming guards to view the characters as vintage performers rather than monsters, reflecting deep psychological conditioning. Phone Guy's voice provides the primary narrative context for the entire first game. His casual explanations of free-roaming modes and suit-stuffing protocols reveal how deeply corporate propaganda has infected the workforce. He is a tragic figure who dedicated his life to a corrupt brand, only to be trapped and eliminated by the very machines he helped maintain. Part 15. Company Training, Rules, and Cover-Ups. The internal training manuals and legal disclaimers of Fazbear Entertainment during this era focus entirely on mitigating corporate liability. New night shift recruits are subjected to onboarding materials that openly admit to the high probability of physical injury or death by suffocation inside the mascot suits. The company's explicit policy states that in the event of an employee casualty, the facility will thoroughly clean the carpets, bleach the machinery, and wait 90 days before filing a formal missing person report with local police. This policy ensures that the brand image remains legally sanitized, preventing immediate criminal investigations from disrupting daily business operations. Training cassettes instruct staff to deflect customer complaints regarding foul odors or leaking fluids with pre-approved corporate scripts. Employees are forbidden from discussing internal maintenance issues, workplace accidents, or historical scandals with reporters or health inspectors under threat of immediate termination and legal action. Fazbear Entertainment built an oppressive system designed to shield executives from consequences while placing low-wage workers in direct danger. The company prioritized profit margins and brand protection above human survival, building a compliant workforce that unknowingly helped cover up a long history of corporate crime. Part 16. Why the animatronics roam at night. During his training audio tapes, Phone Guy delivers the official corporate explanation for the animatronics' nightly roaming mode. He claims that if the heavy servo motors are allowed to sit completely static for 6 consecutive hours, their internal gears will lock up due to mechanical stiffness. This explanation is a transparent corporate deflection designed to mask a terrifying paranormal reality. The company uses technical jargon to convince low-wage workers that moving robots are simple maintenance requirements rather than dangerous hazards. Imagine being the guard sitting in that dark office, listening to a recorded voice tell you that giant mechanical animals walking toward your desk is just standard operating procedure. The characters are roaming the dark hallways because the restless spirits of the murdered children inside them awaken fully at night. Their lingering consciousness completely overrides the factory code, turning the quiet pizzeria into a nighttime hunting ground. The free roaming mode isn't a mechanical safety feature designed by engineers. It's the physical vessel through which angry souls express their suffering. When the sun sets and the dining room empties, artificial programming surrenders completely to human agony. The children's souls are bound directly to the copper wiring, microchips, and steel endoskeletons of the characters. When night falls, their emotional agony overflows, pushing heavy machines off their stage mounts and down dark hallways. Movement isn't an automated software routine executing pre-programmed paths across tile floors. It's a desperate supernatural search for justice against the adult who took their futures away. Picture what it actually felt like to watch those grainy camera monitors as a metal hand reached out from the shadows of Pirate Cove. Phone Guy's mechanical explanation allows the corporate board to avoid admitting that their primary commercial attractions are haunted by murder victims. By framing nightly aggression as a simple routine, Fazbear Entertainment normalizes a lethal hazard. This policy forces night watchmen to defend themselves against angry ghosts under the false impression that they're simply monitoring malfunctioning machinery. It's a calculated legal shield designed to protect the company from massive insurance liabilities and criminal investigations. The company's refusal to address the root cause of the movement creates a continuous cycle of danger for anyone on the graveyard shift. Instead of investigating why the animatronics leave their stage platforms, management installs basic light switches and limited door locks. They treat a supernatural crisis as an operational technicality, placing low-wage workers in direct danger to avoid admitting the truth about their past locations. The corporate culture demands that employees ignore their own eyes and trust the official handbook instead. This reliance on corporate excuses demonstrates how deeply negligence is built into the business model. Fazbear Entertainment prioritizes financial image over human safety, writing employee manuals that disguise paranormal threats as standard mechanical behavior. The roaming mode remains active every night, driving heavy steel machines down dark corridors while the company pretends nothing is wrong. The end result is a death trap disguised as a job, where the employee pays the price for corporate silence. Part 17. The missing children still haunt Freddy's. Years after their initial 1985 abduction, the souls of Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy remain permanently pinned to the physical components of the restaurant. They don't possess the clarity of an adult ghost, existing instead in a state of perpetual, confused cognitive blindness that warps their perception of reality. They don't understand where they're located, or why their physical lives ended in a dark back room. Imagine being trapped inside a heavy steel shell for a decade, surrounded by festive decorations and birthday music, while nobody comes to help you. They're frozen in eternal childhood trauma, unable to escape the metal structures of the endoskeletons. Their lingering human life force continually fuels the mechanical systems of the robots with a volatile supply of supernatural agony, causing the machines to move with unnatural speed and emit human-like groans in the dark. The metal frames aren't just mechanical vessels, they're physical prisons that lock young souls in permanent distress. The original tragedy didn't end when William Afton walked out of the building, it simply settled into the machinery. The spirits can't process the passage of time or understand why their families never found them. They view every adult authority figure inside the building through the lens of their original trauma, mistaking any night watchman wearing a guard uniform for their killer. William Afton. Their aggressive actions aren't born from inherent evil, but from fear, confusion, and an automated instinct to protect themselves from further harm. To those children, every man sitting at that security desk is the man who took their lives. These 5 children remain trapped inside a decaying building that no longer wants them, bound to the very machines that concealed their murders. Their ongoing presence transforms a cheap family pizzeria into a tragic spiritual tomb, where young souls are forced to repeat their nightmare night after night without any hope of rest or closure. The company built an empire on top of their suffering, using their haunted bodies as show props during the day and leaving them to wander in the dark at night. The tragedy deepens because the children's human memories fade further with every passing year. They forget their original names, their parents' faces, and the lives they lived before entering the pizzeria. All that remains inside the steel frames is a concentrated residue of anger and confusion, driving them to attack any adult who sits at the security desk after hours. Now here's where it gets complicated. They aren't monsters hunting for sport, but terrified victims executing a frantic defense against a world that abandoned them. Fazbear Entertainment's decision to preserve the old animatronics ensures that this spiritual captivity continues indefinitely. Rather than dismantling the haunted machines, the company cleans the fabric skins and places them back on stage under bright spotlights. The missing children stay bound to the metal bones, forced to perform for fresh crowds by day and hunt for their killer by night. It's a permanent cycle of trauma that no amount of corporate paint can cover up. Part 18. The restaurant slowly dies. Long before the player selects new game, the final Freddy Fazbear's Pizza is already in a state of terminal commercial decay. Local health departments have slapped the venue with severe sanitation warnings due to stinking odors and fluids coming from the stage, while regional boycott campaigns have crushed daily token revenue. The restaurant is a commercial ghost town bleeding money every week. The place was quiet by the time the guard took the job, and that was the first sign that the brand had reached its absolute limit. The dining rooms sit empty during peak lunch shifts. Arcade cabinets sit broken and unserviced, and the kitchen operates on a skeleton crew to save money. Token sales have flatlined, party package reservations are non-existent, and the corporate board has already drafted a definitive closure notice for the end of the year. The business model has completely collapsed under the weight of public suspicion, leaving a hollow shell of an entertainment hub operating on borrowed time. The physical building itself is falling apart from total neglect. Rainwater leaks through damaged ceiling panels, mold grows along the baseboards, and flickering fluorescent lights create a depressing atmosphere throughout the dining hall. The air is heavy with old grease and industrial cleaning chemicals used to mask foul smells coming from the show stage. Picture what it actually felt like to walk through those empty party rooms at midnight, surrounded by peeling wallpaper and dusty tables that haven't seen a customer in weeks. This commercial collapse reflects the ultimate failure of Fazbear Entertainment's low-budget comeback strategy. No amount of corporate spin, nostalgic marketing, or cheap pizza could overcome the weight of the brand's dark history. Parents refuse to bring their children near the venue, leaving the dining booths empty while management prepares for total liquidation. The public memory wasn't as short as the executives hoped, and the scandals finally caught up with the business. The financial decline directly impacts the night watchman's working conditions in lethal ways. To cut operational expenses, management downgrades the facility's power supply, restricting the security office to a low-capacity backup generator grid that drains rapidly. They refuse to repair broken surveillance cameras or install proper security doors, forcing the guard to handle dangerous mechanical assets with failing tools. The company cuts corners on basic electricity, placing human life on the line to save a few dollars on the monthly utility bill. The dying pizzeria stands as a monument to corporate failure across 4 decades of operation. Every room displays obvious signs of economic collapse, from peeling checkered wallpaper to empty prize displays at the counter. The company's attempt to rebuild its commercial empire ends in quiet ruin, leaving a tiny staff to run a broken facility while the haunted animatronics wait for the final closure notice. It's a dying location built over a dark history, slowly winding down until the front doors are padlocked forever. Part 19. Phone Guy's final week begins. The immediate backstory of the game chronicles Phone Guy's final, catastrophic week, managing the night shift immediately prior to Michael Afton's arrival. As the days progress, the animatronic's behavioral aggression escalates exponentially, systematically wearing down the veteran employee's defense routines. He realizes that the machines are no longer following standard pathfinding routines across the building, but are actively hunting his office with a unified purpose. Phone Guy's nightly recordings transition from calm, corporate instructions into frantic monologues, documenting a total breakdown of his ability to keep the possessed characters away from his desk. He struggles to balance winding camera checks with door controls, noting with growing panic that the animatronics are coordinating their approaches from both side hallways simultaneously. His calm corporate demeanor fractures as he realizes the spatial traps closing in around his position. He notices that the characters are becoming far more persistent than in previous shifts, with Foxy rushing down the west hallway more frequently, and Freddy moving actively in dark sectors. Phone Guy's confidence breaks down as his power management fails, forcing him to confront the terrifying reality that he might not survive his final week on the payroll. Imagine listening to a man try to reassure himself that everything is under control, while heavy metal footsteps echo just outside his door. These final calls record a slow-motion tragedy as a loyal worker realizes he'd been trapped by the very company he served for years. His messages become a desperate record of practical survival tips, recorded in real time as the dark atmosphere inside the security office closes in around him. He leaves these audio tapes on the desk, hoping someone will find them and use his advice to stay alive through their own contract week. His voice grows noticeably strained as the midweek shifts progress, revealing the psychological toll of continuous night shifts inside an indefensible room. He spends hours staring at flickering monitor feeds, listening for mechanical footsteps in dark corridors while managing a failing power grid. The corporate script he reads begins to break down completely, exposing his underlying fear of the machines he once defended to every new hire. Phone Guy's final week represents the absolute collapse of the restaurant security routine. He's an experienced employee who knows every technical trick to survive, yet the escalating spiritual rage inside the animatronics overcomes his experience. His audio diary documents the final days of a man who stayed too long inside a dying company, recording his own descent as the machines close the gap between the stage and the security desk. Part 20, Night 4, The Death of Phone Guy. The turning point of the pre-game timeline occurs during the Night 4 audio recording, which documents Phone Guy's final stand inside the security office. The recording captures a highly coordinated multi-animatronic assault that overwhelms his defenses completely. He realizes within seconds that his power grid is exhausted and his doors can no longer protect him from the entities outside. Imagine sitting in that chair as the lights cut out, hearing 4 separate animatronics surrounding your desk at the exact same moment. The audio records the rapid, heavy banging of Foxy on the left security door, while Bonnie and Chica trigger severe vocal groan interference outside the office windows. In the background, Freddy's iconic music box chime plays in the dark, signaling that the office generator grid has failed completely and plunged the room into absolute darkness. Every exit is blocked, every tool is useless, and the company man is left completely alone in the pitch black. The tape terminates with a sudden, low-pitched animatronic screech, the signature hallucination cry of Golden Freddy, confirming that Phone Guy was successfully overpowered. He's forcefully stuffed into a spare mascot suit in the backstage workshop, leaving behind nothing but a series of pre-recorded audio cassettes sitting on the security desk. The recording cuts out instantly, leaving a terrifying silence on the tape that speaks louder than any long explanation could. Phone Guy's death leaves the security office completely empty, setting up the exact conditions for Michael Afton's arrival the following week. His final recording stands as a chilling monument to the lethal reality of the night shift, proving that no amount of company loyalty or technical knowledge can save a worker once the machines breach the room. The headset sits silent on the desk, waiting for the next watchman to press play. The company's response to his death highlights their complete lack of moral accountability. Management doesn't report his disappearance to local authorities or pause operations to investigate the security office. They simply scrub the floor tiles, bleach the machinery, and wait 90 days to file a missing person report, while putting out a help wanted advertisement in the local newspaper to recruit a replacement guard. It's business as usual for Fazbear Entertainment. Phone Guy dies alone in the dark, his body hidden inside an endoskeleton frame behind the main stage. His recorded calls remain on the desk console, serving as the only guide for the next watchman who sits down in the chair. He becomes another silent casualty of Fazbear Entertainment's corporate cover-up policy, his loyal service rewarded with an unmarked grave inside the very mascot he claimed was his favorite. Part 21. Michael Afton under the name Mike Schmidt. In November of 1993, Michael Afton walked into the restaurant under the falsified legal alias Mike Schmidt. He didn't take the job for the $4 an hour listed in the local newspaper advertisement. Driven by a deep personal mission to locate his missing father, William, and systematically dismantle the terrible supernatural rot of his family's legacy, Michael intentionally sought out the low-paying night watch position. He placed himself directly in the line of fire to uncover the truth about what happened to the missing children. Armed with his internal understanding of Afton Robotics' infrastructure, Michael used this shift to observe the characters up close. He transformed a basic survival job into a deliberate forensic investigation into the state of the trapped spirits. He sat at the security desk facing the same failing generator grid and open hallways that had claimed Phone Guy days earlier. He put on the monitor headset and began tracking the camera feeds with cold, calculating focus. His presence under an assumed name allowed him to bypass corporate background checks while investigating the organic decomposition inside the suits. Michael wasn't an innocent civilian looking for a simple paycheck. He was a man on a mission, willing to endure 6-hour blocks of terror to face the consequences of his father's crimes. He knew exactly what his father had built inside these machines, and he recognized the structural signatures of the original endoskeletons. During his shifts, Michael demonstrated incredible mental discipline under extreme psychological pressure. He didn't panic when mechanical footsteps echoed down corridors or when dark faces appeared outside his office windows. He treated every night shift as an operational challenge, methodically tracking character movement patterns while conserving precious generator power. He understood that staying calm was his only weapon against the lethal hazards in the building. His investigation went far beyond basic survival mechanics. Michael opened mechanical casings, inspected internal endoskeleton wiring, and documented the biological residue left behind inside the plush shells. He placed himself in constant danger to verify that the spirits of his father's victims were still present inside the classic mascot band. Imagine being the son sitting in that dark room, realizing that the terrible rumors about your father's work were completely true. Michael knew that surviving the week was only the first step in a much longer journey. He recorded every anomaly, tracked every movement, and watched how the animatronics responded to his physical presence. The restaurant was a dying enterprise, but the information he gathered inside its walls would shape his choices for decades to come. He accepted the danger because he believed it was his personal duty to clean up the mess his family had created. Part 22. Night 1. Mike's first encounter. On his first official shift, Michael was introduced to the mechanical realities of the office through Phone Guy's first playback tape. He was forced to adapt to the restrictive parameters of the building's emergency power generator, learning that every camera check, light activation, and door closure drained the power bar rapidly. The quiet office felt cold and heavy, filled only with the hum of a small desk fan and the flickering glow of the monitor console. The moment the clock struck 12 a.m., Bonnie and Chica dropped their daytime performance parameters and began tracking his location down the corridors. Michael survived his first encounter by learning the spatial physics of the monitors, discovering that keeping the doors open as much as possible was the only way to preserve power until 6 a.m. He realized immediately that the official employee handbook was completely useless against the real threats roaming the building. He listened to Phone Guy's casual explanations of suit stuffing protocols while checking the hallway blind spots with brief light flashes. The atmosphere inside the office was quiet and tense. interrupted only by the distant clicking of animatronic joints moving across tile floors. Michael didn't let the recorded voice distract him from his surveillance, keeping his eyes on the camera displays to spot any sudden movement on the show stage. Michael completed his first shift at 6 am, proving that his focus and technical awareness set him apart from previous guards. He survived the opening night, but recognized that the animatronics were testing his defenses, preparing for far more aggressive approaches as the week continued. The first night established the strict resource management rules that would govern his entire employment at the restaurant. He realized that the company had deliberately limited his defensive options, providing no weapons or secondary barriers beyond 2 power-hungry motorized doors. He had to rely on precise timing and quick reaction speed to stay alive. Now here's where it gets complicated. The animatronics weren't attacking out of random code errors, but out of a targeted instinct that focused directly on the security desk. As he walked out of the building into the morning light, Michael knew his job was far from finished. The animatronics had moved with a clear, deliberate intent that confirmed they weren't experiencing simple software glitches. He prepared to return for his second shift, fully aware that the danger would escalate once the machines recognized his presence inside the building. Part 23. Night 2. Learning the animatronics patterns. As Night 2 initialized at midnight, tactical difficulty increased as Foxy activated his pathfinding algorithms within Pirate Cove. Michael was forced to balance his visual tracking routines, discovering that if he failed to check camera 1C at regular intervals, the Fox animatronic would rapidly deplete his power grid via a high-speed hallway sprint. Picture what it actually felt like to watch those purple curtains twitch on the screen, knowing a metal predator was getting ready to run. Throughout the shift, Phone Guy's background audio detailed the historical legacy of the brand, while Michael used his heightened focus to calculate the precise speed of Bonnie and Chica's approach. He learned to spot their dark silhouettes through the office window lights before they could breach the doorway. Every light flash had to be short and calculated to prevent unnecessary electrical drain. Bonnie attacked aggressively from the left side, standing outside the window and forcing Michael to shut the motorized door to preserve his life. Meanwhile, Chica approached from the right side, her presence signaled by the metallic clanging of pots and pans inside the unmonitored kitchen space. Michael maintained a steady operational rhythm, dividing his attention evenly between both corridors and the Pirate Cove display. Michael managed his limited generator power with methodical precision, toggling hallway lights and checking Pirate Cove continuously. He survived until 6 and once again, adapting to the escalating aggression of the mascot band as he pieced together their movement logic. He noticed subtle details about the characters' movement that confirmed their supernatural state beneath the fabric skins. Bonnie moved with impossible speed across adjacent rooms, while Chica stayed outside the right window with her jaw unhinged, staring into the room with wide optical lenses. The animatronics weren't just moving around the dining room, they were actively hunting the person behind the desk. Michael recorded these behavioral patterns in his mind, refining his survival strategy for the harder nights ahead. By the end of his second shift, Michael had mastered the basic defensive rhythm required to survive. He balanced checking camera feeds with brief light flashes in the blind spots, ensuring that no character entered the office unobserved. He left the building tired, but determined, ready to face whatever escalation waited for him on Night 3. Part 24. Night 3. The building becomes more dangerous. Night 3 marked the definitive activation of Freddy Fazbear's active artificial intelligence. Moving away from his static center stage position, Freddy began traveling through the dark corners of the east hallways, his approach documented only by a low, deep digital chuckle that echoed through the building's speaker systems. So here's the thing. Freddy didn't hunt like the others, choosing stealth and shadow coverage over direct hallway walks. Michael's defensive strategy had to completely reconfigure. He could no longer rely on simple window checks, as Freddy specialized in slipping into the office completely invisible to the door lights. He forced the watchman to keep the right door shut whenever the front man occupied camera 4B outside the doorway. Managing Freddy required constant visual tracking on the monitor to freeze the lead bear in place. At the same time, Foxy became far more restless behind the curtains of Pirate Cove, requiring frequent monitor checks to keep him pinned in place. Bonnie and Chica maintained continuous pressure on both side doors, creating a multi-front assault that rapidly drained the office generator. The small security office felt smaller with every passing hour as 4 distinct threats closed in on the desk. Michael worked in a state of intense focus, calculating energy drain percentages while tracking 4 distinct movement patterns in the dark. He survived the shift through precise timing, holding off the main band as the facility's spiritual energy continued to rise to dangerous levels. He didn't allow fear to break his concentration, executing every door closure with mechanical precision. The psychological pressure inside the small office reached a fresh peak during this midweek shift. The air felt heavy, the desk fan hummed loudly, and shadows seemed to move along the hallway walls. Michael had to ignore his growing physical exhaustion to maintain absolute control over the door switches and monitor console, knowing a single mistake would end his investigation permanently. When 6M arrived, Michael had successfully navigated a complex web of mechanical threats. He had managed Freddy's stealth approach while keeping the other 3 predators out of the office. He knew that the final shifts of his contract week would push his survival skills to their absolute limit, but he was prepared to stay until the end. Part 25, Night 4, Surviving Without Phone Guy. Plunged into absolute silence following the termination of Phone Guy's live audio tapes on Night 4, Michael faced a brutal test of raw survival mechanics. The animatronics acted with unified, hyper-aggressive coordination, launching near-constant attacks from both sides of the office simultaneously. Without the comforting voice on the phone machine, the building felt vast, dark, and completely hostile. Michael was forced to cut his monitor usage to a bare minimum to conserve his rapidly draining power grid, operating in claustrophobic isolation, while mechanical footsteps echoed down iron corridors. The absence of Phone Guy's voice left the security office feeling cold, lonely, and completely abandoned. He relied on pure hearing to detect movement outside his doorways. Foxy rushed down the west hallway with extreme speed, forcing Michael to slam the left door shut just seconds before impact. The heavy mechanical impact drained a massive block of power, leaving the remaining percentage points dangerously low as the hours ticked by toward morning. Every power loss brought the threat of total pitch black failure closer. Michael relied on pure auditory tracking and muscle memory to check blind spots and manage door controls. He pushed through the 6-hour shift in dead silence, surviving the night through absolute discipline as the facility's power grid hovered on the edge of total failure. He tracked Chica's pots and pans in the kitchen while keeping a close eye on Bonnie's position in the hallway. He experienced subtle environmental distortions throughout the shift. Posters on the east hallway wall shifted to display images of crying children, while ghostly whispers filled the silent office air. Michael recognized these shifts as supernatural manifestations from the spirits trapped inside the machinery, confirming that the spiritual energy in the building was reaching a boiling point. When the morning chime played at 6 a.m., Michael sat at his desk exhausted but alive. He had survived a shift where every single character operated at peak aggression without any corporate guidance. He knew that only one official shift remained between him and the completion of his contract, and he prepared himself for the final escalation. Part 26, Night 5. Mike's final scheduled shift. The final scheduled shift of the standard work week dropped all corporate pretense, delivering a hyper-dense wave of mechanical and psychological aggression. Instead of a training call from Phone Guy, the office phone emitted a terrifying, garbled audio transmission containing a low, demonic, reverse-fused speech clip. Imagine sitting in the dark listening to a garbled voice transmit from an empty building while metal footsteps approach your doorway. This garbled transmission symbolized the absolute spiritual corruption of the facility's electronics network. The animatronics operated at maximum pathfinding efficiency, swarming toward the security office from every available corridor, while Freddy laughed continuously in dark sectors of the building. Michael had to manage his tools with absolute perfection to survive the onslaught. Michael balanced limited flashlight sweeps with rapid door activations, keeping Foxy trapped in Pirate Cove while blocking Bonnie and Chica at the window frames. His power grid ticked down towards 0% as the final minutes of the shift approached in total darkness. He calculated every second of door usage, keeping his hand hovering over the light switches. When the clock finally struck 6 a.m., Michael completed his official contract week, having survived maximum performance parameters from the core band. He collected his weekly paycheck of $120, having proven his ability to outlast a lethal environment. The formal contract was complete, but his personal mission was far from finished. The completion of his 5th night represented a massive personal victory, but Michael felt no real satisfaction. He knew that simply surviving the work week hadn't resolved the underlying tragedy of the building. The spirits remained trapped inside the rusted animatronics, and his father remained at large somewhere outside. Rather than taking his paycheck and leaving the company forever, Michael decided to return for an unscheduled shift. He refused to walk away until he had gathered enough technical data to understand the exact mechanics holding the souls inside the machines. He prepared to return for a 7th night to finish his work. Part 27. The 7th night. Custom night. Refusing to leave the facility after his scheduled week, Michael returned for a rogue 7th night. He manually altered the internal behavioral program levels of the animatronics via a diagnostic interface, mechanically represented as the maximum 20-20-20-20 difficulty mode. He pushed the machines to their absolute physical limits to test their AI architecture under extreme stress. Following his survival of this maximum tier difficulty loop, Michael was abruptly handed a pink slip by the corporate board. His notice listed 2 explicit reasons for immediate termination: tampering with the animatronics, referencing his hacking of their AI levels, and odor. The corporate board didn't care about his survival. They cared about suppressing his technical findings. The mention of odor was a cold corporate cover-up designed to mask the fact that Michael spent his shift examining organic decomposition inside the suits and investigating biological residue left behind by the missing children. The company fired him immediately to protect their corporate secrets and prevent any public disclosures regarding the state of the mascots. Michael picked up his termination slip and walked out of the building, having accomplished his forensic investigation. He left the pizzeria behind, carrying vital knowledge about his father's crimes and the state of the trapped spirits that would guide his actions in future years across other venues. His time as a night watchman at this location was over, but his crusade was just beginning. His firing marked the official end of his time as Mike Schmidt, but set his broader quest in motion. He had confirmed that the animatronics were possessed by real human souls, and he had witnessed the absolute negligence of Fazbear Entertainment firsthand. He knew what he had to do next to stop his father's legacy from causing further harm. As he stepped away from the abandoned pizzeria, Michael transitioned from a passive investigator into an active force in the franchise's story. He dedicated his remaining life to tracking down his father's creations, setting off a long chain of events that would eventually culminate in the final fire years later. Part 28. Power Management. The core gameplay engine of Five Nights at Freddy's serves as a brilliant structural metaphor for systemic corporate corner cutting. The security office isn't powered by a stable municipal grid, but by a restricted, low-capacity backup generator that drains exponentially based on active electronics. The company placed a strict cap on electricity usage, choosing to save money on utility bills rather than provide a safe environment for its employees. Every time Michael checks a camera, turns on a hallway light, or shuts a motorized door, the power bar ticks down faster. If the percentage strikes 0 before 6 am, the building falls into pitch black silence, all defense systems fail, and heavy motorized doors automatically snap open. The guard is left completely defenseless in the dark, waiting for the inevitable outcome. Plunged into darkness, the guard is left completely helpless as Freddy Fazbear approaches the left doorway. Freddy's glowing eyes illuminate the dark room while his internal music box plays the Toreador song, creating a lingering moment of dread before he executes a terminal jump scare. That musical box chime became the iconic sound of absolute failure for every player who ran out of power. This limited power mechanic reflects Fazbear Entertainment's absolute refusal to spend money on basic safety infrastructure. The company forced its overnight employees to gamble with their lives over electrical usage, placing financial savings ahead of human survival in every single scenario. They built a system where staying safe meant running out of power, and running out of power meant death. The power management system creates an atmosphere of constant, suffocating tension throughout the night shift. Every decision to close a door or check a blind spot carries a direct energy cost, forcing the watchman to constantly calculate risk versus survival. A single second of wasted power at 2 am can lead to total blackout minutes before 6 am. By making electricity a scarce resource, the company turned a basic utility into an instrument of terror. The guard isn't just fighting physical animatronics, he's fighting a ticking clock and a failing generator grid inside a dark, hostile environment that wants him to fail. It's a design choice that encapsulates the cold, uncaring nature of Fazbear Entertainment. Part 29. The Security Office. The Security Office functions as a tiny, isolated box of survival inside a wider landscape of mechanical violence. Lacking any rear exits or structural escape routes, the space traps the player between 2 industrial doorways that lead directly into dark corridors. It's a claustrophobic box engineered to keep a worker stationary while the rest of the building roams free. The motorized doors are designed with a counterintuitive fail-safe mechanic that requires an active, continuous stream of electrical current to stay magnetic locked down. The moment the power grid fails, the magnetic locks disengage and the heavy steel doors automatically snap open. The very system meant to protect the guard is designed to open up when power dies. This design transforms the watchman's final sanctuary into a completely defenseless architectural trap the moment energy runs out. The guard sits at a small desk equipped only with a monitor console and a desk fan, surrounded by open doorways that invite danger inside. Imagine sitting in that chair, knowing that the doors keeping you safe are actively draining the energy that keeps the lights on. The office is a claustrophobic space where survival depends entirely on resource conservation and quick reaction times. It represents the ultimate expression of corporate negligence, placing a low-wage worker in a defenseless room surrounded by aggressive machines. The company provided no weapons, no secondary barriers, and no escape hatches for emergencies. The physical items inside the office reinforce the feeling of cheap corporate decline. A single desk fan hums constantly, crumpled paper cups sit scattered across the desk, and faded posters hang loosely on the walls. It's a cheap, uncomfortable workspace designed for maximum utility and zero comfort, reflecting the corporate attitude toward night shift personnel. Sitting in that small chair for 6 continuous hours forces the watchman to confront absolute isolation. The open doorways offer no visual privacy, allowing dark shapes to linger just outside the light. It's a room built to contain a worker while leaving him completely vulnerable to the building's horrors, standing as the focal point of the entire game's tension. Part 30. Every camera explained. The security monitor network maps out the spatial layout of the pizzeria, with each camera angle delivering vital world-building context. Cameras 1A and 1B document the commercial center of the venue, capturing the main stage and dining area under dim, flickering lighting. These central views show the public face of the restaurant, where families gathered during the day. The restrooms on camera 7 reveal quiet corporate spaces where Freddy hides in dark shadows, while the backstage view on camera 5 exposes spare endoskeletons staring directly into the lens. The supply closet on camera 2B serves as a frequent hiding spot for Bonnie. Each room offers a glimpse into the operational realities behind the cheerful mascot show. The east and west hallway tracks operate as high-velocity danger zones that document the final physical approaches of the predators. Cameras 2A and 4A capture Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy as they move down narrow corridors toward office doors. Checking these hallway feeds gives the guard vital seconds to react before an animatronic reaches the blind spot outside the window. This low-resolution video network forces the watchman to decode grainy, flickering visual data from a 1990s console. The cameras offer visibility, but checking them drains power, forcing the guard to balance surveillance with active energy conservation throughout the night. The grainy video quality makes it hard to distinguish between normal shadows and approaching threats. The visual quality of the camera feeds reflects the company's outdated hardware. Static lines cut across the screen, video signals drop out when animatronics move, and camera angles leave obvious blind spots right outside the office doors. The surveillance system is flawed by design, providing just enough information to keep the guard guessing while draining precious electricity. Despite these technical limits, the camera network is the guard's only window into the building's interior. Monitoring individual rooms allows the watchman to track character movement, predict approaches, and manage defense tools before predators reach the office doorway. It's a vital tool for survival in a dark building, connecting the isolated office to the haunting reality of the pizzeria. Part 31. The Kitchen. Camera 6 maps out the interior of the restaurant's kitchen, but the video feed is permanently disabled on the security monitor console. The screen displays nothing but a blank error message stating that only audio channels are operational. This structural omission forces the guard to navigate the space entirely through acoustic triangulation. The company never repaired the video lens, choosing instead to leave the room in complete darkness to avoid spending money on maintenance. Behind that dark camera feed lies a grease-choked workspace that reflects the company's severe operational neglect. Management intentionally disabled the visual monitor to hide the buildup of old grease and trash on the floor tiles. The kitchen was left unmonitored during the night shift, allowing the facility's sanitation issues to remain completely hidden from corporate health inspectors. It's a room engineered to cut maintenance expenses at the cost of basic visibility. When Chica enters the kitchen after midnight, her movements are documented entirely through distinct auditory signals. The audio channel streams the chaotic clanging of metal pots, pans, and commercial cooking machinery echoing through the room. Picture what it actually felt like to sit in that dark office, listening to heavy iron cookware crashing across the floor without being able to see what was moving inside the room. The kitchen serves as an auditory tracking puzzle that requires constant attention from the watchman. When the clanging sound plays through the monitor speaker, the guard knows that Chica is occupied in the eastern sector of the building. The moment the sound cuts off, it signals that she's left the kitchen and is actively moving down the east hallway toward the right security door. Freddy Fazbear also visits the dark kitchen during the later hours of the week, though his presence produces a very different acoustic cue. Instead of rattling pots and pans, Freddy's visit is marked by the faint, echoing chime of his internal music box playing the Toreador song in the dark. Hearing that soft melody stream through the audio channel confirms that the lead mascot has moved off the main path. The kitchen highlights the clever spatial design of the entire pizzeria. By removing visual confirmation from camera 6, the game forces the watchman to rely on hearing rather than sight to survive. It turns a missing camera feed into a high-stakes mechanical hurdle, proving that what you can't see inside Freddy's is often just as dangerous as what stands right outside your doorway. Part 32. Pirate Cove. Camera 1C monitors the isolated stage of Pirate Cove, a secondary attraction sitting off to the side of the main dining hall, surrounded by purple star-patterned curtains and a large sign. This stage stands as a physical monument to the company's operational decline. The attraction was permanently shuttered by management following the mechanical breakdown of Foxy's fabric skin, leaving the Pirate Fox to sit in total darkness while the main band performed. The cardboard sign hanging in front of the purple curtains reads out of order in large letters. The company didn't bother repairing Foxy's torn chest or exposed endoskeleton pistons, choosing instead to hide the damaged mascot behind fabric barriers. The stage was abandoned by management, turned into a storage zone for a broken character that the company couldn't afford to fix or replace. Foxy's unique programming matrix allows him to completely bypass the standard room-to-room pathfinding loops of the other characters. The spatial mechanics of the cove require continuous observation from the watchman's desk. If the guard fails to check camera 1C at regular intervals, Foxy's endoskeleton enters an active locomotive state, systematically advancing through a multi-stage exit sequence behind the purple curtains. So here's the thing about Foxy's mechanics. Ignoring Pirate Cove accelerates his activation routine. The guard watches through the grainy video feed as Foxy slowly peeks through the curtain gap, steps out onto the wooden floorboards, and eventually leaves the stage completely empty. Once the cove is empty, the watchman has only seconds to react before the pirate fox launches a sprint down the west hallway. When Foxy breaks out of Pirate Cove, his kinetic momentum is so immense that his impact on the left security door violently drains massive blocks of the office's remaining electrical power. Each time Foxy strikes the closed steel door, the power penalty increases, punishing the guard for failing to maintain regular visual checks on the cove. He represents a direct mechanical threat that prevents the watchman from sitting idle. Pirate Cove illustrates how Fazbear Entertainment handled damaged assets during its final commercial era. Rather than properly decommissioning a broken robot, the company hid the hazard behind a curtain and hoped nobody would notice. That neglected pirate fox sitting in the dark became one of the most aggressive threats on the night shift, turning a closed attraction into a trap for the watchman. Part 33. The Backstage Room. Camera 5 monitors the backstage maintenance workshop, an industrial room that strips away all corporate theatricality. Its wooden shelves are lined with naked steel endoskeletons, exposed servo motors, and hollow plastic mascot faces that stare blankly into the dark. This room exposes the cold reality beneath the restaurant's friendly facade, showing the bare iron bones used to build the show band. When the animatronics enter this maintenance space after midnight, their behavior changes in an unsettling way. Instead of inspecting the spare components on the wooden shelves, the characters turn their head frames directly toward the camera lens. Their optical sensors shift, turning pitch black with tiny glowing pupils that stare straight through the video monitor into the security office. This room exposes a deep behavioral rule built into the animatronics core software. The characters are programmed to recognize any uncostumed endoskeleton as a direct violation of restaurant safety rules. When they encounter a human night watchman after hours, their corrupted mainframes register the person as a bare metal frame out of suit, driving them to forcefully stuff the individual inside a spare mascot costume. That stuffing routine means instant death for anyone caught inside the backstage workshop. The interior of a spare mascot suit is lined with sharp crossbeams, compressed steel springs, and exposed wiring. When the animatronics force a human body inside the narrow frame, the structural components crush the victim's torso, turning a basic corporate safety protocol into a lethal execution routine. Now here's where it gets complicated. The spare heads sitting on the wooden shelves aren't just empty props. During rare visual glitches, the hollow plastic faces of Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica turn their eyes toward the camera simultaneously, their dark sockets glowing in the dim light. The room feels alive with spiritual energy, showing that the supernatural presence inside the building extends into the spare hardware. The backstage workshop stands as a vital lore anchor for the entire original game. It reveals the mechanical horror hidden beneath the soft fleece coverings, proving that the mascot suits were engineered without proper safety features. It's a workspace where corporate negligence left sharp steel parts and broken software routines ready to trap the next unsuspecting worker. Part 34. The Safe Room. The absolute most important room in the entire building is completely omitted from the security monitor network and official layout designs. The safe room was constructed as an unmapped architectural blind spot that lacked any digital camera connections. It was completely invisible to the animatronics' internal pathfinding software, existing in a spatial void that the machine's digital maps registered as non-existent space. The safe room was originally engineered by Henry Emily during the early Diner era as a private space for spring-lock maintenance and suit storage. It was designed as a sanctuary where employees could step out of public view to operate the dangerous dual-use costumes. The company kept these rooms off official floor plans, ensuring that customers and health inspectors were completely unaware of their existence inside the pizzerias. Because the safe room was invisible to the animatronics' pathfinding routines, the mascot characters couldn't step past its threshold. When an animatronic followed a sound signal to the end of the back corridor, its internal software froze at the doorway of the unmapped chamber. The machine couldn't process the room's existence, leaving the character standing motionless on the threshold while the space inside remained completely hidden. This complete digital isolation transformed the safe room into the ultimate sanctuary for human crime. It was the exact hidden space that William Afton used in 1985 to lure 5 innocent children away from the dining room floor. Afton understood the building's architectural secrets, exploiting the unmapped blind spot to commit his murders completely invisible to the security cameras and staff. Years later, Afton returned to the abandoned restaurant and used that same safe room as his operational base. He deployed a shadow decoy to lead the animatronics down the east hallway, ambush them at the threshold, and smash their steel bodies apart with a crowbar. He believed the invisible room rendered him untouchable, using its dark corners to hide from the ghosts of his past. When Afton died inside the Spring Bonnie suit, the corporate cleanup crew dragged the heavy security doors shut and built a permanent brick wall directly over the entrance. They painted over the fresh drywall to match the corridor, erasing the safe room from the physical building. William Afton was left trapped inside that dark sealed tomb for 30 continuous years, while the world forgot the room existed. Part 35. The spirits inside the animatronics. The supernatural physics of the original pizzeria operate on a model of absolute physical possession. The spirits of the murdered children don't float loosely around the dining room as ethereal ghosts. Their consciousness is forcefully locked inside the industrial components of the robots. Their human agony acts as a spiritual fuel that binds directly to the copper wiring, microchips, and steel skeletons of the endoskeletons. This physical fusion causes real-world changes to the mechanical bodies. The possessed animatronics emit human-like vocal groans through their speaker modules, leak biological fluids from their fabric seams, and move with a fluid speed that violates standard pneumatic design parameters. The agony stored within the metal frames acts as an anchor that overrides factory safety limits and software routines. The spirits inside the suits experience constant physical discomfort from the cramped machinery. The rusted joints, tight wires, and compressed endoskeleton crossbeams create an agonizing environment that keeps the children's souls in a state of permanent distress. When night falls and the building empties out, that stored agony overflows, driving the heavy steel bodies forward down the dark corridors. Possession in Five Nights at Freddy's isn't a clean, magical transformation. It's a messy, painful binding of soul and machine. The dead children don't control the robots with complete clarity, operating instead through a cloud of raw emotional instinct. Their human life force fuels the mechanical limbs, turning standard performance mascots into heavy physical predators that wander the facility after hours. The children's souls are unable to break free from the metal frames because their original bodies were concealed inside the suits. The physical presence of their remains combined with the intense trauma of their deaths created an unbreakable spiritual link to the hardware. They're locked inside steel cages, unable to pass on to peace until the physical metal holding them is completely destroyed by extreme heat. This physical possession model establishes the baseline rules for how spirits interact with machines across the entire franchise. The animatronics aren't just haunted toys moving on command. They're physical prisons that lock young souls into an eternal cycle of fear and aggression, forcing them to inhabit heavy industrial machines inside a dark, rotting building. Part 36. Why the animatronics mistake Mike for William Afton. The continuous nightly assaults on Michael Afton are rooted in a deep tragedy of mistaken identity. The spirits of the children inside the main band possess a degraded animalistic memory structure after years of isolation inside the steel frames. They can't process the concept of a normal security guard or differentiate between individual adults walking through the building after hours. When the animatronics look through the glass window of the security office, their optical sensors scan the human silhouette sitting at the desk. The spirits don't see an innocent employee trying to earn a weekly paycheck. They see an adult authority figure wearing the exact same security uniform that William Afton wore when he lured them into the back room in 1985. Michael Afton's physical appearance deepens this terrifying confusion. As William Afton's son, Michael carries the same genetic traits, physical height, and family silhouette as his father. When the children's spirits look through the dark doorway, his familiar appearance triggers a sudden defensive reaction, causing the corrupted vision of the ghosts to map their murderous face directly onto Michael. The dead children attack Michael out of an automated survival instinct to eliminate the man who destroyed their young lives. They believe that if they can reach the guard behind the desk and force him into a spare suit, they'll finally eliminate the threat that has haunted them for years. They're fighting for their own safety against a man they believe has returned to hurt them again. This tragic dynamic turns every night shift into a heartbreaking encounter. Michael sits at the security desk enduring continuous mechanical assaults from the very children his father murdered years earlier. He can't explain his identity to the angry machines, forced instead to defend himself behind closed steel doors while the souls inside the suits execute a desperate attempt to protect themselves. The animatronics aren't bloodthirsty monsters hunting for sport. They're terrified, confused victims repeating their trauma in the dark. They see every adult who sits in that chair as a returning threat, using the heavy bodies provided by Fazbear Entertainment to strike back. It's a cycle of mistaken identity that keeps both Michael and the children trapped in a struggle until the building closes for good. Part 37. Golden Freddy's appearances. Golden Freddy operates completely outside the physical boundaries that govern the other animatronics in the building. He doesn't walk down the side hallways, trigger door sensors, or follow standard pathfinding routines across the floor plan. Instead, this entity manifests through a series of severe reality warping events that bypass the office's physical defenses entirely. The encounter begins when the watchman checks camera 2B in the West Hall corner and observes the standard poster shifting. The image of Freddy Fazbear morphs into a close-up drawing of a faceless, yellow bear suit with empty eye sockets. The moment that image appears on the video screen, a high-pitched, echoing child's laugh plays through the office speakers. Upon lowering the monitor console, the watchman discovers the empty, slumped shell of Golden Freddy sitting directly on the office floor tiles. The yellow suit sits motionless like a discarded costume, ignoring the closed steel doors and power grid entirely. His presence immediately fills the room with an intense supernatural pressure that distorts the guard's perception of reality. Possessed by the vengeful spirit of Cassidy, Golden Freddy's manifestation triggers severe, blinding hallucinations across the watchman's vision. Black screens flashing with the words "It's me" and close-up images of animatronic eyes fill the guard's sightline. The entity projects raw spiritual power into the small office, creating an overwhelming psychological trap that demands immediate action. To survive the encounter, the watchman must raise the monitor console back up instantly upon spotting the yellow bear on the floor. Flipping the monitor forces the visual hallucination to clear, causing the empty suit to vanish from the room before it can destabilize the guard's mind. It's a high-stakes test of reaction speed that tests the watchman's discipline under pressure. If the guard hesitates or stares at the slumped suit for too long, Golden Freddy executes a terminal attack that bypasses normal mechanics entirely. An enlarged, faceless yellow bear head fills the screen, accompanied by a distorted, low-pitched mechanical scream, instantly crashing the game software to the desktop. Golden Freddy stands as a terrifying proof that some forces inside the pizzeria operate on a completely different level. Part 38. It's me. The iconic phrase "it's me" functions as a collective, spiritual broadcast echoing from the trapped children inside the facility. It flashes across the watchman's vision during high-stress intervals, appears written on the corridor walls, and replaces standard signage throughout the building. It's an atmospheric phrase that connects the gameplay mechanics directly to the underlying supernatural drama. During severe hallucination events, the text flashes rapidly across black screens alongside close-up images of Freddy and Bonnie's faces. The phrase also manifests on the physical walls of the East Hallway, where standard safety rules occasionally shift into dark, blood-like lettering. Even the cardboard sign in front of Pirate Cove shifts from out of order to display the words "It's me" when Foxy leaves his stage. Within the narrative, the phrase operates on two distinct emotional levels. On one level, it's a desperate cry of recognition from the trapped children, trying to communicate their presence to the living world. They're trying to tell the adult behind the desk that real human beings are trapped inside the cold metal bodies, wandering the dark hallways. On a deeper narrative level, the phrase serves as a haunting accusation directed straight at Michael Afton. The spirit of Cassidy, operating through Golden Freddy, believes she's looking directly at her killer, William Afton. The words "it's me" are spoken as a cold declaration of vengeance, informing the guard that his past crimes have finally caught up with him inside the office. Imagine sitting in that dark room as those two words flash repeatedly across your vision while mechanical footsteps echo outside your door. The phrase creates intense psychological dread, breaking down the watchman's composure while reminding him that the building is alive with spiritual trauma. It turns a simple security shift into an intense confrontation with the ghosts of the past. The phrase "it's me" summarizes the entire tragic core of the original game. It bridges the gap between the physical animatronic threats and the young souls trapped inside the steel frames. It's a permanent mark left by the missing children on the pizzeria's physical reality, ensuring that no one who sits in that security chair can ever forget what happened behind those closed doors. Part 39. The newspaper clippings. The true historical backstory of the restaurant wasn't delivered through corporate handbooks or phone guys' calls. It was revealed through a series of rare environmental glitches in the East Hallway on camera 4B. When the watchman checked the monitor feed, the standard rules poster detailing non-flaming shoes and safety guidelines occasionally vanished. In its place, 4 newspaper clippings from a local paper appeared on the brick wall, providing a forensic timeline of the crimes that destroyed the company's reputation. The first clipping detailed the initial abduction that set the tragic pattern in motion. On the night of June 27th, 2 local children were lured into a back room during the late hours of operation. Surveillance footage captured a daytime employee wearing a mascot costume to gain their trust. Although the suspect was identified and taken into police custody, the missing children were never located by investigators, leaving local families in absolute grief. So here's where it gets complicated. The second clipping revealed that the investigation expanded rapidly as 3 additional children were linked to the same suspect. 5 children were now officially missing, and while local police charged the suspect, the bodies were never recovered from the property. The lack of physical evidence forced authorities to release the suspect, leaving the community terrified and outraged as the killer walked free, while 5 families were left without answers. The third newspaper clipping exposed the horrific physical conditions that developed inside the dining room shortly after the disappearances. Parents visiting the restaurant filed urgent complaints with the local health department, reporting that the animatronics had developed a foul stench. Blood and mucus were observed leaking from the eyes and mouths of the mascot characters, leading local health officials to slap the facility with severe sanitation warnings and threats of immediate closure. The final clipping documented the economic collapse that followed the health department's citations. Fazbear Entertainment announced that the pizzeria would close by the end of the year after failing to find a buyer willing to take on the property. Potential investors backed away from the brand, terrified of the toxic publicity associated with missing children and leaking mascot suits. The company was forced to accept total defeat, watching its commercial empire disintegrate under a mountain of public outrage. These 4 hidden newspaper articles served as the ultimate lore anchor for the original game. Scott Cawthon buried the entire narrative foundation of the franchise inside 4 rare texture swaps in a narrow corridor. They confirmed that the animatronics weren't just experiencing technical errors. They were physical coffins containing murdered children whose remains were rotting behind plush fabric, while the company tried to scrub the story clean. Part 40. Rare Screens and Hidden Secrets. The physical atmosphere of the pizzeria was continuously contaminated by deep paranormal glitches that manifested during rare gameplay moments. The hand-drawn illustrations of crying children along the east hallway didn't stay static on the walls. When the watchman checked camera 4A, those drawings occasionally shifted into moving animations of weeping faces, their eyes streaming with black tears as the spiritual pressure inside the building warped the paper decorations. In the backstage workshop on camera 5, a similar visual glitch revealed the internal suffering of the main mascot. The standard poster showing Freddy Fazbear performing on stage shifted to depict a horrifying image of the character tearing his own mechanical head apart. The mascot was shown ripping his plastic jaw open with his own hands, symbolizing the intense internal agony of the spirit trapped inside the steel frame. Imagine opening the game software and being greeted by an eyeless mascot staring directly into your eyes. The main menu screen had a rare chance of displaying a close-up image of Freddy without his fabric skin, showing his raw steel endoskeleton and glowing optical lenses. These sudden visual flashes cut across the player's vision without warning, providing undeniable proof that the physical building was completely collapsing under the weight of its spiritual trauma. The backstage maintenance workshop contained another unsettling secret that broke the laws of standard robotics. When the room was viewed through camera 5, the empty mascot head sitting on the wooden shelves turned their optical sockets toward the camera lens simultaneously. The bare steel endoskeleton sitting on the table shifted its posture, staring into the monitor with an eerie collective awareness that proved every component in that room carried spiritual residue. The environmental audio was equally glitched by paranormal energy throughout the night shift. The faint sound of circus music occasionally played through the kitchen speakers, while phantom whispers echoed down dark hallways where no animatronics were near the office. The watchman heard sudden bursts of child's laughter, echoing through unmonitored sectors, proving that the lingering spirits were actively projecting their memories into the physical environment. These rare screens and hidden Easter eggs weren't random jump scares designed to startle the player. They were deliberate narrative clues that exposed the supernatural reality beneath the restaurant's cheap plastic facade. They showed that the pizzeria was saturated with the lingering life force of William Afton's victims, creating a haunted arena where physical matter and spiritual agony bled together in the dark. Part 41. Dreams, Memories, and the Psychological Horror of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. The true horror of the 1993 location shifted away from simple mechanical jump scares into a domain of psychological trauma. As Michael Afton spent consecutive nights inside the narrow security office, the boundary line between external reality and internal delusion began to vanish completely. The claustrophobic environment exerted intense mental pressure on the watchman, forcing him to navigate a hostile landscape where his own mind became an active enemy. Auditory hallucinations filled the quiet hours between midnight and 6 in the morning. Michael heard phantom whispers echoing from the darkness outside his doorways, accompanied by the soft sound of children's footsteps running across empty tile floors. Sudden bursts of digital static cut through his monitor headset, carrying low vocal groans that sounded like human voices trying to speak through broken speaker wires. His visual perception broke down under the constant threat of mechanical attack. The phrase "it's me" flashed across his vision during high-stress intervals, blacking out his screen with rapid images of animatronic eyes. Michael watched as corridor walls appeared to change shape in the dim light, while dark shadows lingered in the blind spots just beyond the reach of his hallway light switches. Picture what it actually felt like to sit in that small chair, surrounded by the physical creations of a father you were actively hunting. Michael wasn't just surviving aggressive machines, he was confronting the psychological weight of his family's legacy. Every glowing eye outside his window was a reminder of what William Afton had done, turning every shift into a high-stakes confrontation with his own unresolved trauma. The pizzeria acted as a haunted pressure cooker where past tragedies leaked into the present moment. The combination of sleep deprivation, limited oxygen from failing ventilation, and intense spiritual energy warped Michael's perception of reality. He couldn't trust his own eyes or ears, forced to rely on pure discipline and technical awareness to separate physical threats from mental delusions. This psychological depth made the original game a landmark achievement in modern horror. It proved that the most effective terror doesn't come from gore or monsters, but from the psychological erosion of a person trapped in a room with their worst nightmares. Michael survived the week because he refused to let the madness break his mind, standing firm against the psychological ghosts that haunted his father's pizzeria. Part 42. Business finally collapses. By the conclusion of 1993, the financial parameters of the final Freddy Fazbear's Pizza reached total insolvency. The combination of non-stop health code fines, unpaid utility bills, and a complete boycott by local families permanently broke the company's financial model. The commercial comeback that executives had planned had failed completely, leaving the venue bleeding cash every single week. The dining room sat empty day after day as parents refused to let their children step through the front doors. Regional boycott campaigns gained massive traction online and in local newspapers, ensuring that news of the missing children and foul odors stayed fresh in the public mind. Token sales flatlined, birthday reservations were cancelled, and daily arcade revenue dropped to absolute zero. Now here's the problem that finally killed the business. Major insurance companies refused to underwrite the facility's night shift liabilities after multiple security guards vanished without a trace. The corporate board faced massive legal risks that they could no longer hide behind corporate disclaimers or legal paperwork. Without insurance coverage, operating the restaurant became an existential risk for the entire corporate entity. The corporate board surrendered to the inevitable reality of their situation. Executives realized that no amount of marketing spin, price cuts, or nostalgic branding could scrub the name of Freddy Fazbear of its child murder history. The brand was legally toxic, financially dead, and socially condemned across the entire region, leaving the board with no choice but to issue a definitive shutdown order. Fazbear Entertainment drafted formal liquidation papers, preparing to padlock the front entrance and abandon the property. They issued no press releases or public farewells, quietly packing up financial records while preparing to fire the remaining floor staff. The company walked away from the business, desperate to distance itself from the toxic legacy that had haunted its venues for over a decade. The closure of the 1993 location marked the official end of the classic commercial era of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. The dream of a national family entertainment chain built by Henry Emily and William Afton ended in total economic ruin. The front doors were locked, the lights were turned off forever, and the haunted animatronics were left standing on a dark stage inside a quiet building that no longer had a future. Part 43. Preparing for closure. Prior to the final lockout, a corporate cleanup crew entered the building to execute a complete asset liquidation. They stripped the workspace of its kitchen gear, disconnected the arcade mainframes, and prepared the facility for permanent abandonment. However, reflecting the cold negligence that defined the brand since 1983, the company didn't dismantle the main mascot band. They simply left Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy standing on the dark stage, locking them inside to avoid the high cost of mechanical extraction and waste disposal. The corporate board decided that extracting 4 heavy endoskeletons from a doomed location wasn't worth the labor expenses. Technicians packed up office files, gathered unused party supplies, and loaded valuable kitchen equipment onto flatbed trucks parked outside the service entrance. The 4 characters remained standing under unpowered spotlights, their fleece coverings left to collect dust, while workers padlocked the storage closets and cleared out the break room. The treatment of the floor staff during these final days highlighted the oppressive corporate culture. Management handed out pink slips and final checks, forcing every worker to sign strict non-disclosure agreements before leaving the property. Employees were warned that discussing internal maintenance logs or historical incidents with local journalists would trigger immediate legal action. The company built a wall of legal disclaimers to protect its remaining brand value, leaving workers silenced and unemployed. The physical state of the building during this liquidation period was bleak and depressing. Utility companies shut off the main electrical grid, plunging the dining room into absolute darkness while rain leaked through damaged ceiling panels onto paper tablecloths. Workers navigated dark corridors with handheld lanterns, stepping over trash and discarded arcade tickets while stripping the building of anything that held commercial value. Fazbear Entertainment operated with a single priority: minimizing financial losses while erasing evidence of workplace failures. Executives didn't care about the safety of local residents or the spiritual realities lingering inside the building's walls. They viewed the pizzeria as a failed asset that needed to be written off on tax ledgers, choosing to lock the doors and walk away rather than properly decommissioning the site. Imagine being one of those cleanup workers walking out of the building on the final afternoon. You turn off the temporary work lights, pull the heavy back door shut, and hear the metallic click of a padlock locking behind you. You leave 4 animatronics standing in pitch black silence, completely unaware that those metal bodies hold real human souls that won't sleep just because the business failed. Part 44. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza closes its doors. At the end of 1993, the final classic Freddy Fazbear's Pizza officially shut its doors for the last time. The exterior windows were boarded up with heavy timber. The corporate entity dissolved its public assets, and the keys were abandoned. This closure marked the official termination of the traditional restaurant era, leaving a silent building to sit empty in the suburban rain, while its haunted contents remained trapped inside quiet rooms. Workers nailed thick wooden boards across the glass entrance doors, sealing the front foyer off from the main street. The bright outdoor sign that had drawn families for years was disconnected, leaving the image of Freddy Fazbear to rust in the weather beside an empty parking lot. The company issued no public press statements, choosing instead to quietly dissolve its local corporate shell and walk away from the commercial property. Inside the dark dining hall, the 4 animatronics sat in absolute silence on the main stage. Without electricity to power their internal systems, the characters stood motionless like statues, their optical lenses staring blankly at rows of empty party tables. The company didn't bother moving the characters to an off-site warehouse, deeming the damaged machines worthless from a financial perspective. This final shutdown represented the total collapse of Henry Emily and William Afton's original commercial vision. Decades of child abductions, workplace fatalities, and corporate cover-ups had finally caught up with the brand name. The multi-location chain that had dominated the regional entertainment market for years was reduced to an abandoned tomb on the edge of town. The public memory of the location began to fade almost immediately after the boards went up. Local residents avoided walking past the dark parking lot at night, while local newspapers ran final articles summarizing the business failure without mentioning the missing children. The town tried to move on, treating the pizzeria as a sad local failure rather than the site of horrific crimes. The commercial business was dead, but the supernatural curse, born in 1983, remained fully active inside the sealed walls. The spirits of Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie and Fritz stayed trapped within their steel endoskeletons, waiting in the dark while water trickled through ceiling cracks. The front doors were locked forever, but the story inside those walls was far from finished. Part 45. Years of abandonment. Following the closure, the building descended into a prolonged period of total rotting silence. Rainwater leaked through the unmaintained roof, rotting away the checkerboard carpets, causing the wallpaper to peel, and caking the static forms of the animatronics in layers of thick dust and mold. inside the empty dining hall, the mechanical bodies of Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy sat like rusted statues in the damp air. The physical breakdown of the facility was slow and relentless. Damp air filled every corridor, corroding exposed metal fixtures and causing drywall panels to collapse onto empty party tables. Puddles of water formed on the concrete floor tiles, reflecting the dim light that filtered through cracks in the boarded windows. The building smelled of old grease, wet insulation, and stagnant water. Underneath their plush coverings, the internal steel endoskeletons suffered severe water damage over the dark years. Moisture rusted iron joints, short-circuited show-tape mainframes, and degraded internal wiring. Yet despite the physical breakdown of the machinery, the spiritual bonds holding the children's souls to the metal remained completely unbroken. The lingering agony inside the frames acted as an anchor that prevented the ghosts from passing on. Inside the quiet darkness, the spirits existed in a state of suspended animation. Without human visitors or active night guards to trigger their movement routines, the animatronics sat motionless for long stretches of time. The souls of the missing children rested inside their rusted vessels, their consciousness locked inside steel bones, while the world outside moved on and forgot their names. Picture what it actually felt like inside that abandoned building at 2 a.m. The only sound was the steady drip of rainwater hitting the flooded floorboards, while 4 dark figures stood motionless on a decaying stage. There were no bright lights, no arcade music, and no happy crowds. Just 4 haunted machines rusting away in total isolation. These years of silence represented a long pause in the franchise's timeline. The physical remains of William Afton's victims sat hidden inside 4 decaying mascots in a forgotten building, completely cut off from the living world. The spirits waited in the dark, frozen in their ancient trauma, until an unexpected visitor returned to the abandoned restaurant to break the silence. Part 46. Forgotten by the public, but not by the spirits. As the years stretched into decades, the abandoned pizzeria transitioned entirely into the domain of local folklore and dark urban legends. Teenagers and urban explorers shared rumors of the haunted, locked building, claiming that if you stood near the boarded windows at midnight, you could still hear the faint, mechanical whirring of servo motors and the phantom sound of a child crying inside the dark dining room. Local authorities placed warning signs on the chain-link fence surrounding the property, warning trespassers away from the structural hazards inside. Yet despite the warning signs, adventurous teenagers occasionally broke through the back windows to explore the dark corridors, sharing exaggerated ghost stories on early internet forums. To the public, the venue became a classic local legend, a spooky ruin where brave kids proved their courage on weekend nights. However, the reality inside the building was far more terrifying than any teenage rumor. When night fell and the temperature dropped, the spiritual energy inside the endoskeletons woke up. Even without municipal electrical power, the animatronics moved across the damp floorboards, their rusted joints grinding in the dark as they executed their nightly pathfinding loops across empty party rooms. The children's spirits remained trapped inside their mechanical prisons, unable to move on to peace or escape the building. Their human memories faded further with every passing year, leaving only a residue of confusion, pain, and anger. They wandered the dark hallways in silence, searching for an exit that didn't exist while their physical bodies continued to rot in the damp air. The public forgot the real names of the victims who had died inside those walls. Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, and Fritz were reduced to nameless figures in old newspaper archives, their real deaths buried beneath layers of urban folklore. People gossiped about the haunted pizzeria on the edge of town, completely blind to the real human suffering locked behind those false brick walls. This long era of urban legend preserved the building's dark reputation until a fresh generation of treasure hunters arrived decades later. The public treated the story as a simple campfire myth, but the spirits inside the suits never forgot what had happened to them. They stayed anchored to the metal, waiting in the dark for the man who had stolen their futures to step back into the building. Part 47. William Afton returns to Freddy's. The decades of silence were violently shattered on a rainy night when an aging, desperate William Afton secretly re-entered the abandoned ruins of the pizzeria. Carrying a heavy toolkit and an industrial crowbar, Afton picked the lock on the back service door and stepped into the damp hallway. He didn't return out of nostalgia or remorse. He was driven by a clinical desire to harvest the agony-infused metal endoskeletons of his original victims. Afton understood that the animatronics were still active and extremely dangerous, so he utilized his deep corporate knowledge to exploit a software flaw he'd built into the characters years earlier. Operating from the complete digital and spatial blind spot of the unmapped safe room, Afton activated a hidden programming backdoor code to deploy a specialized dark decoy asset. He deployed Shadow Freddy, an ethereal dark bear figure, to broadcast an automated audio cue that forced the animatronics to leave the main stage one by one. Shadow Freddy glided down the east hallway, leading the possessed machines toward the back corridor. Afton waited inside the dark threshold of the safe room, holding his heavy crowbar in the dark while listening to mechanical footsteps approach his position. The spirits inside the suits were drawn to the Shadow Freddy figure by their hard-coded pathfinding routines, following the dark bear down the corridor without hesitation. They moved through the flooded hallway, their rusted joints clicking in the dark as they tracked the audio signal toward the back of the building. They had no idea that their creator was waiting in the shadows with an industrial tool. Afton's plan was precise and calculated. He knew that by luring the animatronics to the threshold of the safe room, he could exploit their internal pathfinding software to freeze them in place. He stood in the dark, watching through the narrow doorway as the first metal mascot rounded the corner, completely confident in his ability to control the machines he'd helped design. This return to his original hunting grounds demonstrated Afton's absolute narcissism and arrogance. He believed he could step back into the crime scene decades later, manipulate his victims' souls once again, and harvest their haunted metal for his scientific research. He stood in the dark, holding his tools, completely oblivious to the supernatural trap he was about to set off. Part 48. Destroying Freddy. The moment the possessed Freddy Fazbear animatronic followed the Shadow Freddy decoy to the entrance of the safe room, its hard-coded pathfinding software locked up completely. The unmapped chamber was an architectural void that the machine's digital software registered as non-existent space. The lead bear froze at the threshold of the room, unable to step past the doorway or return to its normal stage routine. Exploiting this mechanical software error, William Afton stepped out from the dark shadows behind the frozen animatronic, holding his industrial crowbar with both hands. With sudden force, he ambushed the confused machine from behind, striking the mechanical joints and smashing the structural endoskeleton with heavy blows. The sound of metal fracturing echoed down the empty, flooded corridor. Afton systematically battered the lead bear, driving his crowbar through the fleece covering and shattering the iron crossbeams inside the torso. He ripped the plush head from the shoulders, broke the mechanical arm joints, and tore the core endoskeleton out of its fabric shell. He worked with methodical efficiency, reducing the main mascot to a pile of broken metal scrap on the wet floor tiles. The physical destruction of Freddy Fazbear was violent and absolute. Plastic eye lenses shattered across the floor, copper wiring was torn from the internal mainframes, and heavy iron gears spilled out of the crushed chest cavity. Afton stood over the ruined remains of his lead performer, panting from exertion while holding his blood-stained tools in the dark. Afton believed that by smashing the physical machinery to pieces, he'd successfully neutralized the threat and secured the raw metal needed for his remnant research. He looked down at the mangled pile of brown fleece and steel limbs, completely convinced that he'd destroyed the physical vessel holding the child's soul inside the machine. Imagine standing in that dark corridor as William Afton wipes the grease off his hands, looking down at the shattered remains of Freddy Fazbear. He thought he'd won another victory over his creations, totally unaware that breaking the metal frame was about to release something far more dangerous into the hallway. Part 49. Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy fall. William Afton systematically repeated his ambush routine over the course of the night, using Shadow Freddy to lure Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy to the exact same architectural boundary line. One by one, the remaining members of the mascot band followed the dark decoy down the east hallway, their hard-coded software locking up the moment they reached the threshold of the unmapped safe room. Bonnie was the second character to fall. The purple rabbit reached the threshold and froze, allowing Afton to step out from the shadows and strike the mechanical neck joint with his heavy crowbar. Afton battered the synthetic faceplate, broke the arm structures, and tore the blue fabric skin from the endoskeleton, leaving a heap of broken metal and torn fleece beside Freddy's remains. Chica followed the same automated audio cue minutes later, stepping through the flooded corridor until her software stalled at the invisible doorway. Afton lunged from the dark, smashing her unhinged jaw, shattering her optical lenses, and ripping her yellow torso apart. Her internal cookware and steel crossbeams spilled across the wet floor tiles as Afton battered her chassis into useless junk. Finally, Foxy was drawn away from the torn curtains of Pirate Cove. The damaged pirate fox ran down the corridor toward the audio signal, but his pathfinding software froze at the safe room threshold just like the others. Afton ambushed the fox from behind, fracturing his rusted thoracic pistons, snapping his mechanical hook, and tearing his red fabric skin to shreds. Afton stood over a massive pile of shattered scrap metal, rusted gears, and torn fleece that covered the corridor floor. He'd successfully dismantled all 4 original animatronics, leaving the classic band reduced to useless garbage. He believed he'd permanently eliminated the threat, holding his heavy toolkit while preparing to gather the metal endoskeletons for transport. Afton's absolute arrogance convinced him that physical force could solve his supernatural problems. He stood among the ruined remains of his creations, feeling completely triumphant after destroying the machines that had haunted his thoughts for decades. He picked up his tools, completely unprepared for the metaphysical reaction his actions had just triggered. Part 50. The spirits are released. By completely destroying the mechanical shells of the 4 animatronics, William Afton accidentally executed a profound metaphysical calculation. Breaking the steel endoskeletons and tearing the fabric skins shattered the physical bonds that had locked the children's souls inside the metal for decades. The spirits were no longer restricted by heavy machinery or hard-coded pathfinding software. The 4 translucent phantom forms of Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, and Fritz burst out of the shattered piles of scrap metal, floating into the flooded corridor in a state of absolute rage. They were suddenly joined by the furious, spectral ghost of Cassidy, who manifested as the fifth crying child, her form radiating an overwhelming spiritual energy that filled the entire hallway. Afton watched in sudden terror as the 5 translucent figures drifted past the shattered metal on the floor, their glowing forms blocking his only route to the building's exit doors. The man who had spent decades manipulating machinery and hiding behind corporate shields was suddenly cornered by the raw, unshielded ghosts of his victims. His scientific tools and crowbar were useless against non-corporeal entities. The spirits didn't scream or cast physical strikes. Their mere presence radiated an overwhelming spiritual pressure that drove Afton into a state of blind panic. He backed away down the corridor, retreat being his only option as the 5 translucent ghosts advanced upon him in dead silence. The children demanded spiritual justice for their 1985 murders, closing the gap between them and their killer. Terrified by the supernatural presence, Afton backed through the doorway of the unmapped safe room, seeking shelter inside the dark storage chamber where he'd committed his original crimes. The spirits followed him to the threshold, floating into the narrow chamber to corner their killer against the back wall. Cassidy's ghost stepped forward, blocking the doorway, while the other 4 spirits surrounded Afton. Picture what it actually felt like inside that dark, windowless safe room as William Afton backed against the concrete wall, staring into the glowing faces of the 5 children he'd murdered decades earlier. His arrogance vanished in an instant, replaced by raw terror as he realized that the ghosts he'd tried to destroy were finally standing right in front of him. Part 51. William enters the safe room. For the first time in his life, William Afton faced inescapable consequences as the 5 phantom figures advanced upon him. The translucent forms of the missing children didn't float aimlessly. They moved with a single purpose that blocked every exit in the hallway. Afton backed away down the corridor, his industrial tools completely useless against non-corporeal entities that didn't care about physical force. The spatial layout of the building offered him no real escape routes. The front entrance was boarded shut from the outside, and the back service hallway was completely cut off by the spectral children. Afton's mind raced to find a technological solution, or a physical barrier to shield himself from the ghosts, but his scientific instruments weren't built to handle raw spiritual presence. Retracing his steps in total panic, Afton retreated through the doorway of the unmapped safe room. He sought shelter inside the dark storage chamber where he'd committed his original crimes, hoping the digital blind spot of the room would somehow protect him. The spirits didn't stop at the threshold this time, floating past the invisible software boundary that had restricted the animatronics earlier. The children followed him into the narrow, unventilated space, cornering their killer against the back wall. Cassidy's ghost stepped forward to block the open doorway, while the other 4 spirits drifted closer in dead silence. The room was dark, damp, and completely isolated from the rest of the building, creating a claustrophobic trap where Afton couldn't hide from his past. Afton backed against the concrete wall, his breath coming in fast, shallow gasps as the temperature in the room dropped. The spirits didn't cast physical blows or make loud threats. Their mere presence radiated an overwhelming spiritual pressure that broke Afton's composure. The man who'd spent decades manipulating machines and hiding behind corporate shields was trapped with no legal loopholes to save him. He looked around the dark storage space frantically, searching for anything he could use to defend himself or buy time. His eyes scanned the dusty maintenance racks, past rusted tools and broken mechanical parts, desperate for a way out. In that moment of absolute panic, he realized that his physical strength couldn't save him from the consequences of his actions. Part 52. The Spring Bonnie suit. Sitting on an old maintenance rack in the corner of the safe room was the original Spring Bonnie Springlock costume. It was the same yellow mascot suit Afton had worn when he lured the missing children to their deaths in 1985. The suit was old, rusted, and heavily decayed from years of exposure to roof leaks inside the unventilated chamber. Afton's severe narcissism and ego drove him to make the worst decision of his life. In his panicked mind, he convinced himself that donning his original mascot disguise would fool the spirits once again. He believed that if he stepped inside the yellow rabbit, the ghosts would register him as their familiar mascot rather than their human killer, restoring his psychological control over the situation. He grabbed the heavy suit off the rack, ignoring the damp fabric and rusted metal components inside the frame. Afton frantically forced his limbs into the narrow slots of the leg and arm structures, pushing past exposed metal rods and sharp joint brackets. He pulled the heavy torso piece over his chest and secured the internal latches. Forcing his body into the tight space alongside compressed endoskeleton parts. He lifted the heavy rabbit head and placed it over his face, locking the neck pins into position. Standing up in the center of the safe room, he spread his yellow arms wide in a posture of absolute triumph. Inside the suit, Afton felt an immediate surge of confidence, believing he'd outsmarted the spirits of his victims one final time through his technical knowledge of the hardware. He laughed out loud in the dark room, mocking the translucent figures as he stood inside the yellow rabbit disguise. He looked through the mesh eye holes at the 5 glowing ghosts, completely convinced that his mascot suit had restored his authority over the room. His arrogance made him completely blind to the environmental hazards surrounding him in the decaying chamber. Rainwater was actively trickling through a crack in the ceiling directly above where he stood, dropping cold moisture onto the shoulder plates of the suit. Afton was breathing heavily from panic and laughing loudly inside the helmet. His warm breath creating condensation that coated the internal spring locks with moisture. He stood in the center of the room, oblivious to the fact that he'd just armed a lethal mechanical trap against himself. Part 53. The spring lock failure. The combination of rainwater, heavy respiration, and sudden physical movement proved fatal for the rusted spring lock architecture. In a single, sudden mechanical snap, the tense steel springs holding the endoskeleton back gave way completely. The internal locks released their tension simultaneously, allowing thousands of pounds of hydraulic pressure to slam the heavy steel endoskeleton frame directly into William Afton's body. The mechanical failure was an agonizing deconstruction of a human frame inside a tight space. Compressed steel rods, sharp joint brackets, and heavy iron gears snapped forward into his flesh, crushing his limbs, torso, and head inside the suit. Long metal bars pierced through his chest and lungs, while sharp wires tore through his throat and vocal cords, severing his speech modules before he could let out a full scream. Afton collapsed onto the wet concrete floor, his body thrashing violently as the heavy endoskeleton continued to settle into his internal organs. Blood poured from the seams of the yellow fabric, mixing with the rainwater on the floor tiles as the internal gears ground through bone and muscle. The mechanical suit was literally rebuilding itself inside his living tissue, fusing steel and fabric permanently with his body. The five spirits stood in absolute silence as they watched their murderer collapse in his own blood. The sight of Afton's physical destruction brought a sudden end to their decades of anger. As Afton's thrashing slowed to a halt, the translucent ghost figures slowly faded away into the air, their spiritual debt satisfied as they left the dying man alone in the dark room. William Afton didn't die immediately on the floor. His overwhelming desire for survival and the intense agony of the spring lock failure triggered an immediate spiritual reaction, binding his soul directly to the metal endoskeleton and decaying fabric of the spring Bonnie suit. He lay paralyzed in a pool of his own blood, trapped inside a mechanical coffin of his own creation, conscious but unable to move as the facility fell back into total silence. The safe room grew quiet again, filled only with the sound of rain dripping from the ceiling. Afton remained on the floor, his vision fading as the heavy suit held his crushed body in place. The man who'd spent decades taking lives was left trapped inside the very machine he'd used to commit his first crimes, waiting in total darkness while his life faded away. Part 54. The safe room is sealed forever. In the days following Afton's spring lock failure, a structural maintenance crew hired by a shadowy corporate shell company entered the abandoned ruins. They were tasked with sanitizing the property and clearing valuable materials before a final corporate liquidation. The workers moved through the dark hallways, discovering the mangled scrap of the destroyed animatronics scattered across the floor tiles. When the crew reached the back corridor, they discovered the entrance to the unmapped safe room. Stepping inside with flashlights, the workers found the blood-soaked scene on the floor, the yellow spring Bonnie suit lying motionless in a pool of dried blood containing the crushed remains of William Afton. The scent of biological decay filled the small, windowless chamber. Operating under strict corporate standing orders to erase any physical evidence of workplace fatalities or scandals, the crew didn't call the local police department or emergency services. They knew that reporting a dead body inside a mascot suit would reopen the 1985 murder investigation and ruin the company's remaining intellectual property value. The manager on site ordered the workers to seal the room immediately. The crew dragged the heavy iron security door shut, locking it from the outside. They brought in cinder blocks, mortar and drywall, building a permanent thick false wall directly over the doorway. They painted and papered over the fresh brickwork until it blended seamlessly into the surrounding hallway, completely erasing the safe room from the physical building. William Afton was left inside the dark, sealed room, his agony-infused body permanently fused to the rusted spring Bonnie suit. He sat in total darkness for 30 continuous years, surrounded by concrete walls that cut him off from the outside world. The company believed they'd successfully buried their co-founder and his crimes forever, leaving a living monster to rot in a hidden tomb while the world forgot he'd ever existed. The false wall stood undisturbed as the rest of the pizzeria decayed around it. Nobody who walked past that corridor in later years knew what was sitting just inches behind the drywall. The corporate cover-up was complete, leaving William Afton trapped in a silent, windowless grave, while Fazbear Entertainment washed its hands of the entire property. Part 55. What happened to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza after the closure? Following the sealing of the safe room, the property was completely wiped from corporate ledgers. The remaining scrap metal of Freddy, Bonnie, Chica and Foxy was left scattered across the damp floorboards, and the building was permanently condemned. The brand name entered a decades-long period of deep corporate sleep, transitioning from an active business into a toxic legal black hole that no venture capitalist or developer would dare touch for an entire generation. The physical building sat abandoned on the edge of town, its boarded windows warping in the summer heat and winter rain. Local real estate developers avoided the parcel of land entirely, knowing that any attempt to rezone the property would bring back memories of missing children and unresolved health violations. The pizzeria became a physical dead zone that nobody wanted to buy or demolish. Inside the silent dining hall, nature slowly reclaimed the interior. Mold spread across the checkered carpets, weeds grew through cracks in the foundation, and roof leaks widened until entire ceiling sections collapsed onto empty party tables. The building deteriorated into a hollow shell, filled with rotting timber, rusted pipes, and discarded paper cups from a forgotten era. Fazbear Entertainment dissolved its active subsidiaries and filed away its legal paperwork, effectively going dormant. The executives who'd managed the company's final years retired or moved on to other industries, leaving behind a massive trail of unpaid debts, sealed court files, and buried police reports. The brand was legally dead, its intellectual property locked away in corporate vaults while the public moved on. The memory of the 1993 location faded from daily conversation, leaving only broken records and quiet rumors behind. The town grew around the abandoned site, building fresh commercial zones while leaving the rusted pizzeria to sit behind a chain-link fence. It stood as a silent monument to a failed business empire, hiding its terrible secrets behind boarded doors, while 30 years passed in total silence. Yet beneath that rotting roof and behind that false brick wall, the story wasn't truly finished. The physical restaurant was abandoned and forgotten, but the supernatural energy bound to its floorboards remained dormant, waiting for the right moment to be rediscovered. The classic era of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was over, but the dark history buried inside those walls was waiting for a fresh generation of treasure hunters to tear down the boards. Part 56. The building becomes a local legend. Over the 30 years following the sudden closure of the 1993 restaurant, the decaying building transitioned entirely into local urban mythology. The facility sat abandoned behind a rusty fence on the edge of town, its exterior walls covered in fading graffiti. Local teenagers shared exaggerated stories on internet forums about the locked pizzeria, claiming that if you stood near the boarded windows at midnight, you could still hear the mechanical whirring of servo motors or the soft sound of a child weeping inside the dark dining room. The venue became a modern rite of passage for adventurous urban explorers and high school kids looking to test their courage on weekend nights. They broke through rotting wooden boards or squeezed past bent window bars, stepping onto damp carpet tiles with flashlight beams. The explorers documented their visits with cameras, taking pictures of water-damaged party hats, broken arcade cabinets, and empty pizza boxes scattered across dusty laminate tables. They treated the entire building like a haunted museum, completely oblivious to the real human tragedy that had taken place beneath its roof. What these teenage explorers never realized was just how close they were standing to the true horror of the franchise. While they took photos of empty stage platforms and swept flashlights down dark hallways, a mere few inches behind a seamless false brick wall in the back corridor sat the mummified carcass of William Afton. The serial killer who had destroyed so many lives sat trapped inside the rusted spring Bonnie suit in total darkness, his crushed body fused to the metal frame, while young explorers walked past his hidden tomb without a second thought. The local police department placed warning notices along the perimeter, warning trespassers away from structural hazards like failing ceiling beams and rotted floorboards. City officials tried to ignore the building's existence, refusing to allocate municipal funds to demolish the structure or clear the overgrown lot. The property sat in a legal limbo, frozen in time while the surrounding neighborhood built fresh commercial developments, leaving the old pizzeria to rot like a dark monument to corporate failure. The urban myths surrounding the building grew more elaborate as decades passed without official answers. Online communities speculated about secret underground tunnels, corporate conspiracies, and golden mascots that walk through solid walls. The true historical details of Charlotte Emily's death, the missing children incident, and the bite of 87 blurred into exaggerated campfire stories. The real human suffering of the victims was slowly replaced by digestible internet lore, turning a crime scene into a harmless ghost story told by kids in the dark. Yet despite the public treating the location as a fictional legend, the supernatural reality inside the structure remained active. When the sun went down and the exploratory crowds went home, the spiritual energy embedded in the building's foundation pulsed in the quiet dark. The lingering agony of the past saturated every brick and iron pipe, keeping the memory of William Afton's crimes alive until a fresh group of treasure hunters arrived decades later to tear the boards down. Part 57. Fazbear Entertainment attempts to bury the truth. Whenever independent journalists, local historians, or internet researchers published investigative reports detailing the dark history of the 1993 location, Fazbear Entertainment deployed its corporate legal teams to suppress the information. The resurrected company board recognized that their brand identity was fundamentally toxic as long as real murder investigations remained linked to their name. They launched an aggressive campaign to rewrite history, using legal threats and financial buyouts to sanitize the record before launching future commercial projects. Corporate lawyers systematically bought up regional newspaper archives, removing original 1985 and 1993 press clippings from public libraries and microfilms. They issued heavy cease and desist letters to web forum administrators, forcing online archives to delete scanned police reports, sanitation notices, and missing children flyers. The company used copyright claims to scrub digital discussions, framing any detailed historical analysis of their business practices as unauthorized trademark infringement designed to harm a legitimate enterprise. So here's the thing about how the company operated. They didn't just suppress real evidence, they actively manufactured counter-narratives to confuse the public. Corporate representatives claimed in press interviews that stories of haunted mascots, leaking suits, and missing guards were fictitious creepypastas created by disgruntled former employees. By leaning into the absurd nature of internet rumors, Fazbear Entertainment convinced the general public that the tragedies were merely urban legends invented to sell cheap thrills. This strategy of corporate gaslighting allowed the company to distance itself from the actions of William Afton without ever taking responsibility for the lives lost inside their venues. Executive management treated decades of child abductions and workplace fatalities as minor PR hurdles that could be cleared with fresh marketing campaigns and legal shields. They built a wall of corporate disclaimers around their past locations, ensuring that no living executive could be held financially or criminally liable for historical negligence. The company's legal team went so far as to fund low-budget indie video games that exaggerated the historical events, intentionally muddying the waters between reality and satire. By turning their dark history into an interactive joke, Fazbear Entertainment ensured that anyone who spoke about real missing children would sound like a delusional conspiracy theorist. They weaponized pop culture to discredit true crime investigations, successfully insulating their brand identity behind layers of self-aware entertainment. This relentless campaign to bury the truth succeeded in changing how the public viewed the classic pizzeria era. By the time the company prepared for its modern comeback, most consumers believed the old scandals were nothing more than silly neighborhood rumors that had gotten out of hand. Fazbear Entertainment successfully erased the names of the victims from public memory, leaving a clean commercial slate that allowed them to secure corporate funding for massive future installations like the virtual reality experience and the Mega Pizzaplex. Part 58. Why FNaF 1 became the center of the series' lore. The original restaurant featured in Five Nights at Freddy's stands as the narrative anchor for the entire multi-game franchise. While later entries expanded the universe with complex underground facilities, viral computer programs, and sprawling futuristic malls. Every major storyline in the mythos traces its roots directly back to that single budget-strapped pizzeria. It's the central crossroads where the paths of William Afton, Henry Emily, Michael Afton, and the missing children collided in a quiet, claustrophobic arena. This original location established the foundational baseline for how spiritual possession works across the entire universe. The 4 classic animatronics showed players that human agony could bind directly to mechanical components, fusing a child's soul with steel crossbeams and copper wiring. The gift of life mechanic, the physical degradation of the suits, the foul odors, and the erratic nightly pathfinding routines were all defined inside those narrow corridors, creating a blueprint that every subsequent game had to respect and build upon. Now here's where it gets complicated. The 1993 pizzeria served as the ultimate forensic battleground for the Afton family tragedy. It was the location where William Afton returned to harvest his victims' souls, leading directly to his death inside the Spring Bonnie suit. It was the workplace where Michael Afton took his first undercover security shift under a fake name, initiating his decades-long crusade to track down his father's creations and fix his family's legacy. Everything that happened later in the timeline was a direct consequence of what occurred inside that small building. The venue also marked the operational focal point for Charlotte Emily's ongoing crusade as the puppet. Though she wasn't physically visible on the stage during standard gameplay, her spiritual influence permeated the entire building, holding the original 5 missing children together as a unified force. The original restaurant proved that the victims weren't just random ghosts wandering in the dark. They were a collective force bound by shared trauma, waiting for justice while defending themselves against any adult who entered the office. Furthermore, the environmental storytelling of the first game set a standard for narrative mystery that defined modern horror gaming. Scott Cawthon built a layered story out of flickering poster textures, faint audio cues, and mysterious phone messages left on a desk machine. Players were forced to act like forensic investigators, piecing together newspaper clippings and camera anomalies to uncover a dark tale of corporate negligence and serial murder hidden beneath a simple arcade game facade. The legacy of that small pizzeria remains unmatched because it captured the pure essence of the franchise's horror. It didn't rely on massive futuristic technology or grand apocalyptic stakes. It focused on a low-wage worker sitting in a dark office, managing a failing power grid while 4 haunted machines walked down narrow corridors. That simple, grounded setup established a timeless atmosphere of industrial decay and human tragedy that continues to define Five Nights at Freddy's to this day. Part 59. The restaurant's influence on Fazbear's Fright. When a team of independent entrepreneurs decided to construct Fazbear's Fright the horror attraction in 2023, the 1993 pizzeria served as their primary treasure trove. The attraction builders didn't view the history of missing children as a tragedy. They saw it as a profitable commercial opportunity, seeking to capitalize on 30 years of urban legends. They launched an extensive salvage expedition into the abandoned ruins of the classic pizzeria, hunting for authentic relics to build their theme park maze. The salvage crew picked through the damp, collapsed rooms of the old pizzeria, recovering physical artifacts that had sat undisturbed in the rain for decades. They salvaged the iconic desktop fan, empty mascot heads of Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, vintage arcade cabinets, and hand-drawn children's party drawings from the dining room walls. They even recovered the hollow physical shell of the puppet, mounting these items along the narrow corridors of their new attraction to create an authentic atmosphere of corporate rot. Unbeknownst to the attraction owners, bringing those authentic relics under one roof created a concentrated reservoir of lingering spiritual agony. The physical props were saturated with the emotional residue of the children who had died around them, generating an intense negative energy field across the new facility. This spiritual saturation directly affected the night watchman's perception, triggering phantom hallucinations of withered and classic animatronics that attacked the guard and crashed his maintenance systems. Imagine being the guard, sitting in that fake horror office, looking at real empty mascot heads mounted on the wall, knowing that those exact plastic shells had hidden murdered children decades earlier. The line between theatrical entertainment and real supernatural horror dissolved instantly. The entrepreneurs thought they were building a harmless haunted house for thrill-seeking park visitors, completely oblivious to the fact that they had assembled an active supernatural catalyst that called out to the dark. The salvage team's obsession with historical authenticity reached its ultimate climax when they breached the back corridor of the classic pizzeria. By tearing down the false brick wall that had sealed the safe room for 30 years, they uncovered the ultimate relic, the mummified remains of William Afton wrapped inside the Spring Bonnie chassis. They loaded the heavy, rusted suit onto a flatbed truck and transported it directly into Fazbear's Fright, believing they had found the ultimate prop for their attraction. The 1993 pizzeria directly birthed the nightmare of Fazbear's Fright. By collecting the physical remains and spiritual residue of the old location, the salvage crew unintentionally built a new stage for William Afton's return. The classic restaurant's artifacts provided the fuel, while Springtrap provided the physical threat, setting off the fiery chain of events that defined Five Nights at Freddy's 3 and proved that the past could never be truly buried. Part 60. From Freddy's to Springtrap. The historical narrative of the original restaurant reaches its natural payoff when the salvage crew breaches the false wall of the 1993 safe room. For 30 years, William Afton had sat in complete darkness, his crushed body permanently fused to the steel endoskeleton and decayed green fabric of the Spring Bonnie suit. His soul hadn't departed. It remained anchored to the hardware through pure agony, waiting in a state of suspended animation behind concrete and drywall. When the salvage workers broke through the brickwork with heavy hammers, fresh air and light flooded the windowless chamber for the first time in 3 decades. the workers didn't recognize the biological remains tangled in the rusted gears, treating the battered green rabbit as a rare vintage animatronic mascot. They hauled the heavy carcass out of the ruins, completely unaware that their financial discovery had reawakened the most prolific serial killer in the franchise's history. Bringing the spring Bonnie suit into Fazbear's Fright completed Afton's transformation into Springtrap. The name given to him by theme park marketers became a literal description of his existence, a human monster trapped inside the very machine he'd used to commit his crimes. As the suit's electrical systems connected with the attraction's power grid, Afton opened his optical lenses, realization setting in that he had been brought into a fresh facility filled with new systems to exploit. Springtrap walked through the dark corridors of Fazbear's Fright with a fluid, terrifying velocity that set him apart from standard machines. He wasn't restricted by basic 8-bit pathfinding loops or automated programming. He moved with full human intelligence, using ventilation shafts and camera blind spots to stalk the night guard. His mummified jaw was visible behind the broken rabbit mask, showing the gruesome physical fusion of human tissue and steel crossbeams. This natural evolution from classic pizzeria mascot to walking nightmare demonstrated the relentless nature of William Afton. The fire at the end of Five Nights at Freddy's 3 was meant to incinerate his physical vessel, but his soul refused to let go of the metal frame. He survived the inferno, crawling out of the burning rubble of Fazbear's Fright a scrap trap, proving that the curse born in the original restaurant couldn't be destroyed by simple flames. The transition from Freddy's to Springtrap represents the ultimate tragedy of Fazbear Entertainment's legacy. A company built on bringing joy to children produced an immortal monster that walked the earth for half a century. The original pizzeria wasn't just a failed business, it was the birth chamber of Springtrap, creating a terrifying entity that continued to hunt, infect, and corrupt fresh victims across every subsequent entry in the series, Part 61. Every mystery the games still leave unanswered about FNaF 1. Despite decades of community analysis and subsequent game releases, the original Five Nights at Freddy's retains an array of open mysteries that keep lore scholars in active debate. Scott Cawthon built the 1993 location with deliberate narrative gaps, leaving key historical details unexplained to encourage ongoing investigation. These unanswered questions prove that even the most thoroughly documented pizzeria in gaming history still holds secrets beneath its floorboards. The most famous unresolved mystery concerns the exact identity of the victim of the Bite of 87 mentioned by Phone Guy during his Night 1 audio tape. While later games confirmed the Bite of 83 involved the crying child at Fredbear's Family Diner, the specific victim and perpetrator of the 1987 incident at the toy location remain unconfirmed. Fans continue to debate whether Jeremy Fitzgerald, Fritz Smith, or another employee suffered the frontal lobe injury, and whether Mangle or Withered Bonnie executed the bite. Another major debate centers on the exact chronological timeline of Michael Afton's employment as Mike Schmidt. While most evidence points to November 1993 based on paycheck dates and real-world wage rates, some theorists suggest his shift occurred in a different year entirely. The precise relationship between Michael's experience at the classic pizzeria, his survival of the scooping room in sister location, and his physical condition during his night shifts continues to generate fierce discussion across the community. So here's where it gets complicated. The ultimate fate of Phone Guy's physical remains and soul remains one of the most haunting open questions in the series. The Night 4 audio recording confirmed he was overpowered by the animatronics, but the games never showed where his body was hidden. Lore scholars debate whether corporate cleanup crews discovered his remains in the backstage room, or if his soul became permanently trapped inside a spare endoskeleton stored in the building's hidden corners. The exact metaphysical nature of Golden Freddy during the first game also remains subject to multiple interpretations. While Cassidy's presence inside the yellow suit is widely accepted, the question of whether Golden Freddy existed as a physical animatronic sitting in a back room, or purely as a reality warping projection generated by the crying child and Cassidy's combined agony, remains unresolved. The game deliberately blurs the line between physical suit and metaphysical illusion. These persistent mysteries demonstrate the brilliance of Scott Cawthon's storytelling design. By leaving specific details open to interpretation, he ensured that the original restaurant would never feel completely solved or sterile. The unexplained gaps in the 1993 timeline keep the original pizzeria feeling vast, dangerous, and atmospheric, inviting fresh generations of players to step into the security office and search for answers in the dark. Part 62. The complete legacy of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. In conclusion, the original restaurant featured in Five Nights at Freddy's remains the most important, atmospheric, and foundational location in the entire franchise. It masterfully established a timeless aesthetic of industrial decay, economic desperation, and childhood innocence corrupted by systemic human evil. The quiet, claustrophobic halls of this budget-strapped pizzeria created a permanent blueprint for modern horror fiction, proving that true terror comes from grounded human choices rather than cosmic anomalies. The central horror of the classic location was never purely supernatural. It was rooted in the cold, calculated choices made by adults. William Afton chose to murder innocent children out of jealousy and narcissism, while the executive board of Fazbear Entertainment chose to bury his crimes, intimidate low-wage workers, and cut safety corners to protect their stock value. The monsters weren't born in a fantasy void, they were manufactured in corporate factories and enabled by human greed. The human cost of this corporate machine was borne entirely by the innocent victims who were failed by the system. Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy were stripped of their futures, their remains hidden inside plush costumes while their families received no answers. Employees like Phone Guy and Michael Afton were placed in defenseless offices with failing generator grids, treated as disposable assets by a company that cared more about carpet cleaning bills than human lives. The artistic brilliance of the original game lies in how much horror it extracted from minimal resources. With static camera feeds, a desk fan, 2 motorized doors, and a flickering power meter, Scott Cawthon crafted an unmatched experience of psychological tension. Every audio cue, from Chica's pots in the kitchen to Freddy's deep digital laugh, served a dual purpose as both a survival mechanic and a piece of terrifying world building. Though the physical building eventually rotted away, and the original spirits found their peace in the flames of later games, the legacy of that small pizzeria continues to haunt modern pop culture. It transformed a simple indie game into a massive global phenomenon, inspiring books, merchandise, and an endless stream of community theories. The original 4 animatronics standing on that dark stage remain iconic symbols of modern digital horror. The quiet dining room, the flickering hallway lights, and the heavy mechanical footsteps approaching the office door created a landmark narrative that stands the test of time. The original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza stands as a powerful reminder that when human cruelty is entered into a corporate machine, its dark code will continue to run long after the dining rooms fall silent. The original nightmare is complete, but its echo will stay in the dark forever.